Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's the time of day again. I would like to welcome you as the deputy mayor. The mayor is off this evening and out of town, so I'll be chairing the meeting. We'd like to start the meeting this evening by a call of order and then Pledge of Allegiance. And Greg, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this evening? Yeah? Pledge of Allegiance. The next order of matters on our agenda this evening is communications from the public. This is the time we'll take communications from the public for any matter that is not otherwise a public hearing on our agenda this evening. I will preface this by we have one, quote, public hearing. We have one public hearing this evening that is not really a public hearing with respect to that matter, which is the ordinance amending the city code regarding Highway 93 South. I would ask that given that public hearing is closed and was closed last hearing, unless there is something specifically new, and that you keep any comments regarding that matter to less than 3 minutes. It would be most appreciated. Any other matters that you want to bring to our attention, please come forward now. Bless you.
Good evening, Mary Flowers, Citizens for a Better Flathead, 135 South Main in Kalispell. There is a letter in your packet tonight to for the city to support the Northwest Drug Task Force. And I wanted to just remind you of another really important service that they do for all of our county. And we publish, as part of our Waste Not project, where to recycle pharmaceutical waste in the Flathead. And we work, and the county works in close partnership with Northwest Drug Task Force to make sure that these drugs get collected and safely disposed of. It not only makes our neighborhood safer, but it protects our water quality. And so if you can amend your letter, I would also encourage you to appreciate the work that they did with us initially to get these programs set up. And I would also, we're just getting ready to come out with a new updated listing of this. But in Whitefish right now, in addition to the police station, you can also take these to Super One, to the Alpine Apothecary there, and to Glacier Medical Associates. And that's really a nice resource for a community to be easy access to safely dispose of unwanted medicines. So, the second topic I want to talk to, which I understand I'm under a time limit for, but you did receive a memo from us just reiterating some earlier points we made, but I just strongly encourage the council to, back in 2014, when your planning jurisdiction got reduced and the county rezoned the area south of Highway 40 for commercial uses, it's almost like we are still stuck in a hypnotic vision that the only thing that can happen on our highway corridors is commercial. And I really am urging you to step out of that view and to provide some fresh leadership to show that these corridors can become really important residential resources, and particularly given the housing need that Whitefish is facing, that you look at that. I've provided you in these written comments a sample of the a district for a traditional residential transitional district, which would be focused on housing. You still have the opportunity if someone, and under state law, you're required to accept a petition if someone wants to petition you for a commercial use. But you have the ability to look at that as a PUD or to handle it in other ways. But I think what I really want to encourage you to do is to let the property owners and builders know that you would like to see sewer and water used for housing and not for commercial that would detract from our downtown and our existing commercial areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Any other public comments this evening?
Hi, I'm Gloria Nelson, 547 Blanchard Lake Road. I'm here tonight as the Executive Director of Project Whitefish Kids in support of the lease amendment agreements that you guys have in your packet tonight. Project Whitefish Kids has partnered with the city for 20 years, and we have been able to create this amazing youth recreational facility on the south end of town. And we are looking forward to the next 70 years with our new lease to create a fabulous youth recreational facility for our entire community. We're also currently working on finalizing the sublease with North Valley Music School that you guys originally drafted. We haven't finalized it yet, but it will be similar to the one that you guys created. And we're also working on finalizing events, special events contract that's similar to the city one as well. Thank you for your support.
Great. Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Deidre Corson, 213 Whitetail Lane, Whitefish. Thank you for hearing us all tonight. I'm also speaking on behalf of the item 10 on your agenda, the sublease between PWK and the City of Whitefish. I'm the Executive Director at North Valley Music School, and we, on behalf of our entire board and staff and faculty and leadership, we would like to also support the new sublease of which we will be a part of in the future, and look forward to the collaboration between the city and BWK and North Valley Music School. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Good evening. Kate Walker with Northwest Design Studio, 301 East 2nd Street, Suite 1B, Whitefish. This evening I would like to speak to item 7B on the agenda. I can do that now or when we get to that item this evening.
7B is actually a public hearing.
7B.
Oh, excuse me, 7B. It says with 6B.
Consideration for a variance.
We will, actually, I will open it to the public at that time.
Certainly.
I think that's it.
Thank you very much.
Staff report on that, so I'll do that. So thank you.
Oh, I'm Greg Gunderson with Forest Restoration and the Center for Native Plants. I reside at 840 First Street in Whitefish, and I have a couple of comments. Two items on behalf of Richard and Carol Atkinson, who reside at 404 Dakota. Similar to Kate here, we were told by planning staff that the only time to speak was now during public comment.
Greg, given the nature of these, and they're specifically on our agenda, I will I'll allow you to speak at that time when it's cogent and we're on the matter at hand, as opposed to now when we're going to have to think about what you said much later. So I think that if you're okay with waiting, we'll do that. I think that's probably better order, shall we say.
You bet. There is one item on your consent agenda that does apply to the Atkinsons. Just in case there was any confusion, both projects are related. Because they're two separate parcels, we had to submit two separate applications.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment this evening? Anybody from online?
Thank you. Thanks. Anybody online, if you'd like to speak towards the council regarding anything that is not listed as a public hearing, go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll just give you a moment. Okay, I think we're good, Deputy.
Great, thank you, ma'am. Next, we have communications from volunteer boards. Any volunteer boards in the audience that wants to give a report? Seeing none, I'll look to council. Yes, sir.
Yes, I was speaking on behalf of the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. Today, we did some work and discussed the transportation plan, is it called that way, Craig? And we found that there was so much information to be sifted through that we sent some input to staff and the consultant to grade differently all the priorities of the various bits and bytes. So if anybody's interested offline, I can give you that information.
Thanks, Giuseppe. Any other volunteer boards? Reports? Seeing none. We're going to move on to our public hearings this evening. Oh, great. Item 5. We have the consent agenda. Do I have a motion or any corrections?
I just have one correction, which is page, I wasn't sure if it was page 4 or page 32 of 379, but it's line 8, and it's just replacing, under Mary Flowers' comments, line 8, replace drip with strip. Otherwise, that's all that I have. And if nobody else has any other corrections, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed, like sign. Matter passes unanimously, as corrected. Next, we'll move on to our public hearings this evening. We have 2. The first of which would be our ordinance 2204, an ordinance amending City Code Whitefish to add a Article Y, Chapter 11, to establish a WBT zoning district, business transitional district, as implemented on the implementation of the 93 South Corridor Plan on a first reading. This matter, from a public hearing perspective, has been closed, and so I will turn it back to council for a motion and/or discussion. Rebecca.
I'd like to make a motion to postpone to a date in the future.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Rebecca, would you like to address your?
Yeah, I really appreciate, I talked to Dave today about this. I appreciate all the work that's gone into it over the last few years, but I just feel like I need more information about how the county and the city are going to work together, and just some of the comments that we've received, I feel like there's no rush to get it done. It'd be nice to get it done in case we had annexations requesting soon, but I would rather that we got it done in a way that feels good to the community and take our time with it. So I would not vote to move it forward as of yet.
Rebecca, just as a point of order, that's a fine motion. I think we would, if we're going to proceed that way, I would like for us to give council some, or give staff a little more direction as a group to tell them what we're concerned about, and if this passes, I would like for us to have a discussion about when we might be able to have that work session and what we might look for from council.
Could I ask a quick procedural question?
Sure, Karen.
So if we postpone it, it will not appear in old business, correct? we'll bring it back up when we're ready, but if we table it, it would appear in old business and we'd have to pull it off of the table by a vote. Is that how that works?
Yeah, if you table it, you're gonna have to pull it back up for a vote.
Okay,
If you
but it
just
would
postpone it
appear,
to a date certain, then it will appear on the agenda.
right, but if it's tabled, will it just appear in old business or
Nope.
it just doesn't appear
It
anywhere?
just does not appear until you guys bring it back up off the table.
Okay. And Rebecca, you postponed to not a date certain, just postponed indefinitely? I'm just trying to clarify your motion.
Well, what I would really like is to have a work session with the county planning director and actually sit down and talk about the existing corridor plan that's out there at this point, why they're not enforcing what was decided before. We have things like where the roads are gonna line up and things like
I'm just asking about your motion, Rebecca. Did you have a date in mind when you wanted to take this up again, or is it just postponing it indefinitely?
it's postponing it indefinitely until
Okay.
we know if we can meet with the county to go through a few details about what's supposed to be happening out there that
Okay,
isn't happening out there.
thanks. I just wanted to clarify that part of it. Thank you.
Okay, so I would like a work session with the county planning director. Dave said that they've met within the last few weeks, but when I went to those meetings that developed that corridor, a lot of what we were trying to do in Whitefish were supposed to be part of that corridor plan, and that has not materialized. But a lot of what we're concerned about was discussed at that time. And so I just need more clarification about what the county is planning to do to hold to their standards and how we can improve that process. And then to also look at opportunities for housing out there, and the possibility of providing water and sewer to more of those housing options out there. So I don't know. I feel like it's not that clear to me what the impact would be if we proceed at this point.
Okay, I'd like to, Rebecca, I think maybe what we ought to do is, I understand what your desires are, why you would like to postpone. I think it would be appropriate for us to investigate, maybe with staff, to determine whether or not when we might be able to bring this back up or have it, to give us some sense. Dave, Dana, is there a time next 2 weeks, or are we looking at a month out before we might be able to have a work session? We're gonna, I think I'll make sure that we get you some direction as to where we're going before we leave here this evening, but I want to know what you think can happen in terms of timing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Dana would have to answer on what we have for work sessions coming up. I mean, if you're trying to get the county to come to a meeting, I mean, that might take a little longer to get them to commit to something like that. But.
Okay.
Yeah, depending on the county schedule, we do have time at our next work session or April 4th. As you go past that, we will start seeing our work sessions taken up until probably June. So April 4th, to get people here is probably going to be the ideal date.
Do we have an ability to have a work session at our next scheduled council meeting?
Yes, I can't guarantee anybody would attend from the county, but yes.
I understand, but that's an aside, we ought to discuss that, but okay. So we could do it as early as 2 weeks from now?
Yes.
Okay. Andy?
Yeah, I appreciate the effort to get the county to the table, but I think we need to continue moving forward here, and if they're able to attend at our next work session, great. If they're not, I think we should still have it on our agenda at the next work session. I would like to, otherwise, because the way schedules work and as we head into budget and all of those kinds of things, and as Dana said, our work sessions are starting to fill up. I mean, getting together with the county may be difficult, may be very difficult, and I'm not gonna want us, have us sit here on our hands for the next 6 months waiting to have a meeting with them. I think we need to do something far sooner than that. So while it is important and I think will help,
Right.
if it's not gonna happen, I don't wanna not do anything. That's kind of where I'm at, so.
I would concur with that. I think, if it's all right with you, Rebecca, I'd like to call the question that we have in front of us now with the ability that we will then give direction to staff to bring it back to us in 2 weeks, hoping to get the county to join us for some portion of a work session. If they can't, I don't think that prevents us from doing the work we might need to do in terms of what we as a council and a community might find acceptable out there in terms of what we want to have in our city. Does that sound fair?
Just would like to add, it might be a good idea for Dave to provide what the county plan was for that corridor for us.
We could, I mean, that's easy.
Yeah,
That's easy.
it is, but I don't think we've ever formally looked at it, but it was, they hired a private planner. They had
Agreed.
a lot of public involvement for the owners that live out there. They had design standards and they talked about a lot of things, but if there's no implementation or enforcement, I think we should at least have that conversation with them.
I couldn't agree more. Hopefully they'll listen a little more than they have in the past. In any case, with that, yes, Dana?
Frank, just to clarify, if we're going to postpone to a date certain, the work session isn't technically a meeting where you make decisions, so
Right.
have that be a different date or
Yeah.
later that meeting.
Yeah, well, my thought would be, given what I think might happen at that work session and what feedback we might get back, that we would have the work session in 2 weeks with the idea that it would give staff 2 weeks to make the revisions, bring us an actual hard document that we could then look at and actually make any minor changes we might want or might be needed, and then pass it at that time. So that would go on to the April 2nd, 3rd, whatever that is, meeting. It would be at least what I would think would be happening. So, with that said, any further discussion on the motion to table? Pardon? Oh, is there any public
We're postponing
postponing to
to 4/4,
4/4?
right?
You can have the work session on 4/4,
No,
but,
we're gonna have the work session on,
3:20, okay, yeah.
and, yeah,
And then the actual,
yeah. That's what I think we got permission to do. Okay.
Can I just does staff understand what we want them to bring to the work session, or do we need to provide more direction?
What I want to do is get this matter, let's rule on the matter, and
Okay.
then I want to have a discussion, and I want to get each of you to give staff direction on what your concerns are and how you want to proceed. Does that sound fair? All right, with that said, all those in favor of the motion, right, say aye, or raise your hand. All those opposed? The matter passes 5-1, with Councilor Giuseppe voting against. That said, Andy, why don't we start with you? What do you think staff needs to be concerned about or bring to us for information or questions or answers?
Depending on how in-depth we want to get here, and I'm not sure that we want to go too deep into the woods at this point, but I think that something that drives us in a little more focus towards housing, I think that is imperative for what we're going to look at, and in part because I don't think from the commercial side, given what the county zoning is out there now, most commercial activities outside of probably a hotel or something are not going to need to come to us for services or even going to want to annex at that point. Part of our hope was obviously that we would, by offering something that's broad enough that people would want to come in and would have some design standards, but I just don't think that's going to happen. So I guess my thing that I would really like to see us look at is something that could push us towards more housing and away from commercial as much as possible, so. And no mini storage.
Rebecca, any direction you want to give council or give staff?
Well, like I said, Dave, if we could have a copy of what was decided on out there as the corridor plan, and then possibly a comparison about what we're proposing in that. And then if the planning director can't come, maybe a planner could come. I just feel like, like Andy said, it's an ideal place for housing outside the highway interface. And then Craig, maybe if we would be running into any issues with high groundwater, and water capacity, I guess that's the only other thing is like how much can we actually plan to grow housing out in that area if there's some restrictions to that. You know, it's people's personal property, so they might not elect to annex, but I just feel like the county put a lot of time into creating their plan for that area. The people that own property out there spend a lot of time on that too, and I just think we should have a deeper conversation to make sure that we get it right.
So in my opinion, bringing large-scale commercial down south of 40, basically extending the B2 down south, is not something that I think necessarily benefits the community. I think the value for the community, as Andy said, is in the housing opportunities that could be down there for folks, and I think that's something we need really badly. So to me, you know, I would like to reframe this a little bit, that, as I said at the last meeting, that accommodates smaller scale commercial along the highway and opportunities for housing behind it. So the specific things that means to me, my short list here is to remove some of the uses and also clarify some. So I know some that I would be interested if need to be there are definitely hotels and motels, bars and restaurants, car dealers, mini storage. Those all feel like things we might not need down there. But I also think that it needs to reflect the fact that low and middle density housing should be an encouraged use, and high density housing should be a conditional use. And so the third thing I have is, to that end, perhaps we should consider a reduction in the building size down from 10,000 square feet, which is where it is currently in the B2 district. So that's my short list. I do think it's good that we are putting a date that we're going to finalize this, because I do think that we've opened the door for annexation petitions already, and if we don't have some guardrails in place, who knows where that's going to go. So I'd rather get this done. In my opinion, I'd like to see smaller scale commercial with more residential. So.
Steve?
Yeah, a couple things. I agree with what Andy and Ben said, both of them, regarding commercial and what's our real ability to control what gets built commercially based on whether somebody would annex in or not. So I would like to see kind of a line by line, item by item accounting of what those commercial uses are that are currently in the WBT, or the conditional zoning district, whatever it's called, and what the justification is for those. And then I'd also like to know what's on the ground now, how it relates to the plan and the current zoning that's out there, just so we have a clear picture of what has already been done outside of our purview, because that does make a difference in how that area develops. And then anything we can do to encourage medium and high density housing out there, I think, is important. So those are the three things I'd like to be talking about at that work session.
Giuseppe, any direction you'd like to give?
Yes, I just wanted to confirm that I believe the city staff did their homework. And when I met with them, I went through all the questions that I asked here. And I understood that they looked at the existing legacies. They looked at the various zones in county. And I also understand that now we operate within a principle of annexing only upon petition. which means that someone wants to build the ugly building out there will just not petition to annex and just build it. Which also means that if we zone in ways that are not compliant or compatible with the desires of the investors who purchase those properties, they would just not petition to annex. So for clarity and for the public, I like to make clear that this is not a zoning establishment within city limits. We can establish the zoning overlay, for lack of a better word, but it has no effect until a property owner petitions the city for annexation. And correct me if I'm wrong. Hence, I think this exercise is either trusting the staff, having done the right homework, deep, and ask the questions if we are not clear on what they have explained to us, and move on. That's why I voted against postponing it.
Thank you, Giuseppe. From my perspective, I think that we all recognize that the idea that a commercial piece of property out there that would otherwise, that the likelihood of a currently zoned commercial property, even if it was a permitted use in our zone, the likelihood that they would voluntarily annex to come into this city so that they would then have to pay higher city taxes and pay resort tax on top of that is highly suspect. And so I think what we ought to focus on, or should be focusing on, is if we had our druthers and we wanted it in the city, what would it look like? And I think, and I agree with Giuseppe. Dave, I think I told you this after the last meeting. You and Wendy did exactly what we asked you to do, and I understand that, and so there's no flies on this one. But I think we've got to reorder our thinking of not with the hope that, you know, if we put some commercial things out there or not some, that somehow magically that's going to be, these guys are going to think, oh, that's a great idea, I'll annex into the city. It's only going to be, I think the only people that are going to be interested in annexing the city is going to be some high density human use, albeit a hotel or some other middle or even high density residential use. And so I think we need to figure out what we want to see out there, and, you know, commercial nodes, fine, those kinds of things, fine. But I think, from my perspective, I think the numbers of uses that we think are okay out there needs to be pared down dramatically. And so I think we could walk through each of those from my perspective, and I could get comfortable and also having an orientation towards how do we, through our zoning, our proposed zoning out there, incent or prioritize residential uses, and to send the message, if anything else, that that's the kind of thing that we're interested in and interested in supporting as a city through our infrastructure. I think that's a good way to kind of, at least from my perspective, a good way to kind of look at it. Do you think you have what you need?
I do.
Good. All right. With that, I think we can move on. Thanks. I'd like to move on to what would be, I guess now, our ordinance 2205, or 2204, I think it would be at this point. An ordinance amending the zoning regulations, Title 11, Chapter 2, Article A, WA Agricultural District, Article B, WCR County Residential District, and so on.
All right, so despite that super long title, this one is going to be very quick, so we'll give you guys that before you have a heart attack looking at that one. Basically, this is just a pretty simple text amendment to chapters 2, 3, 9 of Title 11, and what it's going to do is it's going to redefine the number of individuals allowed at an in-home daycare versus a daycare center, which would basically just change the threshold from 12 to 15 children. This is just based off of Senate Bill 142, which the state just adopted to address Montana's shortage of affordable childcare, pretty briefly besides the definition. The only thing that actually changes is just the staffing requirements for daycares, and that has nothing to do with our code. So all we're changing is the threshold from 12 to 15. The sections that we're changing, again, will be Chapter 2 of the zoning regs, which discusses zoning districts, and then Chapter 3, which is special provisions, which there's a separate daycare section. Only thing in there will be that 12 to 15 again. And then finally, Chapter 9, which is our definition section of zoning code. So the legal ad was put out. We haven't received any public comment, even at the planning board meeting. Findings were all met as seen by staff and are pretty straightforward. There is no change in use at all with this one. It's just simply some pretty fairly negligible effects overall. So the planning board recommendation was to recommend approval to council, and then this will be on your consent agenda for March 21st. But I can answer any questions if you have them.
Any question for Tara? Not seeing any? I think you're good. We advertised for a public hearing on what will be our ordinance 2204. Is there any public comment this evening? Any public comment online?
Please raise your hand if you would like to speak towards this item. You're good.
Seeing none and hearing none, we'll close the public hearing and I'll turn it back to council for a motion. Andy?
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I would move to approve WZTA 22-03, findings of fact in Exhibit B and the language in Exhibit A as recommended to us by our own very experienced Whitefish Planning Board from their February 17 meeting. And we would be approving that ordinance on a first reading. That's 2204.
And I second it.
Any discussion on the matter? Seeing none from council, all those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed, like sign. The matter passes unanimously. Thanks, Michelle, and on we go. We have two other items listed for consideration this evening as public hearings, but both of those have been pulled. One has been continued with the planning board to March 4th, and the other one's been tabled by the planning board on the February 17th meeting. So that will move on to communications from Planning and Building Director. First is a consideration of a request from Carol and Richard Atkinson for Whitefish Lake and Lakeshore Protection Permit for one-time beach gravel placement and a minor variance for a one-time gravel placement for a sitting area on the LPZ over the predominantly vegetated surface located at 404 Dakota Avenue.
Hi, my name is Jessica. I'm on the planning staff. I think I've met most of you by now, but still relatively new. So the first project that we're looking at, Michelle has a couple slides pulled up. You can go to the next one, Michelle, if you... So this is a request from Carol and Richard Atkinson at 404 Dakota Avenue. Oh, sorry, what? Oh, that's okay. So here's the site plan pulled up. Carol and Richard Atkinson, 404 Dakota Avenue. They are requesting multiple activities within the Lakeshore Protection Zone, including a standard permit for a one-time beach gravel application, and then a minor variance for a gravel application on a predominantly vegetated surface for a seating area. There's an existing dock within the Lakeshore Protection Zone and a set of stairs that total 761.6 square feet of constructed area. This permit does not ask for any additional constructed area within the Lakeshore Protection Zone. With the standard permit, they would like to place 255 square feet of 1-inch washed round river rock along the water's edge. So on the site plan, it's kind of that upper gray portion right along the beach there. 255 square feet at 4 inches of depth. This would be 3.15 cubic yards of material, and they're allowed 3.8, which is 1 cubic yard per 8 linear feet of shoreline for our code. In this area, the predominant surface is gravel, so that's why it's a standard permit for that section of the permit. The variance portion of this comes from the gravel application that they're proposing with the seats kind of in the center of the site plan there. And this is because it would be in gravel placed in a predominantly invasive vegetated area. And all 75 square feet, approximately, the 4-inch deep, 3/4 inch crush and pea gravel, and they would do about 1.4 cubic yards there, so they're still way under that 13.8 that's allowed for their lot. The portions of the code that make this a variance are the preservation of native plants. They did get a survey from a botanist that showed that there are mostly invasives like Canada thistle and reed canary grass in this patch, but there's also some horsetail, which is native. So preservation of native plants are there important for biological and aesthetic components of the lakeshore and shall be preserved wherever possible. And then 1331P, 1A and 1B, both pertain to placing gravel where it's predominantly vegetation. You can go to the next slide. So this is kind of a picture of the site. The gravel that would be the seating pad is surrounded by the trees that you can kind of see there. You can't really see the flat section. But none of those trees or native shrubs would be disturbed. It would just be the reed canary grass and thistle and kind of horsetail in that circular area. So considerations for a variance, there's 4 things we have to look at. And due to unusual circumstances or enforcement, it would result in hardship. Their beach is pretty sloped, so they don't have any flat locations to create a seating area. And as the owners age, they find the uneven surface unsafe and hard to walk on. And with that slope, they don't have anywhere to place chairs. So because of their age and the steep topography of their lot, there's a hardship. And no reasonable alternatives exist is variance consideration number 2. There are reasonable alternatives, which include doing nothing and placing chairs in the vegetated area without gravel placement. Another option is only placing gravel along the shoreline as part of the standard permit and not placing gravel in the variance, not allowing the variance. There's no other suitable location for the proposed gravel pad because the shoreline is steep, and where they are proposing, it's already sitting on kind of a natural flat bench area. They wouldn't have to do any grading or anything like that. And however, they would not be able to have their flat, stable seating area to accommodate their age and make their lot safer. Again, my finding, there are reasonable alternatives. However, they would not, enjoyment of their lot would not improve. And granting of the variance would not have adverse impacts on the lakeshore. It would not diminish water quality or habitat for fish or wildlife. Can you go to the next slide? The project would be utilizing an existing game trail to access the seating area, so you can see it in these photos. That's just kind of a natural gravel that wildlife has walked through their lot and created that. They're not going to mess with that or place gravel anywhere along there. It's going to stay as is. Wildlife could still use it. Only washed materials would be used, so no effect to water quality, and it would not interfere with navigation or recreation or create a public nuisance or safety hazard. With the way those trees are staying there, you can hardly see that portion where they want to place the seating area, so you wouldn't be able to see it from if you were boating on the lake. It would be completely hidden by the trees. And the vegetation that would be removed consists of mostly invasive species such as reed canary and Canada thistle. So no environmental impact or impact to navigation or visual or public safety hazards. And the requested variance would have no effect on general universal public benefit, but it would provide the lot owners a benefit of having a safer place to place their chairs and walk down to the beach. So staff, first, Lakeshore met on this on February 9th, and they moved to approve with an amendment to deny the variance portion of the application. They voted 3 in favor, 3 in denial of the amendment, and 3 in favor and 3 in denial of approval. So that means that Lakeshore essentially denied the application. Staff does recommend approval of the requested minor variance and the standard permit for beach gravel application.
Any questions for Jessica? No? All right, thanks.
Okay.
We did reference earlier that we were going to allow Greg to speak to this matter at this time rather than at the public hearing. So Greg, if you've got anything to add.
Thank you for the opportunity. I did notice on page 1 of your staff report that it listed Kate with Northwest Design Studio as the applicant. So I just wanted to clarify that I believe she's with the next item, and I'm Greg Gunderson with For Restoration and the Center for Native Plants, and we're working with the Atkinsons on this. I want to say thank you to Jessica for the very thorough description there. And, you know, it was really curious to me while this reed canary grass is down there. Reed canary grass is one of the most invasive species in riparian areas throughout Montana. Millions of dollars have been spent to eradicate it in areas with thicker soils. It grows oftentimes over your head. It can be over 8 feet tall. I think due to the thin soils down here, it's not very robust. But when you see the photos, the predominant vegetation there is that reed canary grass. My first time down there, I was shocked to see below the high water mark a sewer manhole cover. And upon doing the research, sure enough, there's a sewer main, a city sewer line that runs below high water along the Atkinson's entire property line. The location where we'd like to do this small pad is adjacent to that. And my belief is that through the construction of that sewer main that was in the late 60s, that created the disturbance, and that's probably when the reed canary grass and thistle was first imported, and once it's there, it's hard to get rid of without active management. So if you look at the first page that Michelle put up there that had the topographic lines, this little spot where we'd like to do the seating area is the flattest spot on their property, below their home site, and the shoreline below the high water mark slope. So where we would like to do that northern river rock, even that has more slope to it, which makes it difficult to place a Adirondack chair or anything. So it's just kind of a perfect little nook that's totally hidden from the lake. It'd be invisible from the lake. It just seemed like a great little spot here that we can accomplish our objectives. I'm happy to answer any additional questions you might have.
Any questions for Greg on this matter?
Just want to clarify, this spot is above the high water mark, is that correct?
Yes.
Where you want to put the pad?
Yes.
Okay.
But
it's in the Lakeshore Protection Zone?
Correct. It's in the zone that extends towards the land. And the Atkinsons did recently have it resurveyed to ensure that it's outside high water mark.
And their access to that would be down the steps that are further to the north or west, whatever direction that is?
Yeah, to the north, basically the same drawing that's up on the screen right now. Those are their existing steps. It's just a narrow, probably 3-foot wide stairway that gets you down to the lake shore, and then there's an existing game trail that they would utilize. As probably 40 feet or so, 35 feet maybe from the stairs to where this little pad is located.
And there's no other flat spot below those stairs or near those stairs to put chairs?
There's not. Again, the topo lines kind of show it, but this is literally the flattest spot. And actually, the bottom step is right at the high water mark. And so as soon as you go below the stairs, where the stairs are located, you're below high water.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Since I opened this up, is there any other member of the public that would like to speak to this matter? Thank you. That said, I'll turn it back to council for a motion and/or discussion.
I would move to approve WLV 22-W with the 16 conditions of approval as noted in the staff report.
Moved by Counselor Davis and seconded by Counselor Norton, if I heard you correctly. Any further discussion on this matter? All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed, like sign. Matter passes unanimously. You're good to go. Thanks. Next item we have is a consideration of a request from Brad and Dana Cleff Family Trust for a Whitefish Lake and Lakeshore variance for a dock to exceed the allowable construction area and length located at 1500 West Lakeshore Drive.
All right, so this is another variance request within the Lakeshore Protection Zone. Just to clarify, based on a question on the last application, the Lakeshore Protection Zone extends 20 feet from the ordinary high water mark. And then there's a 10-foot buffer off of that as well, just if anybody had questions. So this variance is for the Brad and Dana Shelf Family Trust, and it is at 1500 West Lakeshore Drive. They have 72 feet of lakeshore frontage, and they are requesting a variance to exceed the allowable constructed area within the protection zone and also length of their dock over 100 feet. So they have an existing permit from 2019 for a dock that's over 60 feet. Yeah, Michelle has pictures of this one too, I think. Same PowerPoint, yep. Oh, no, you're fine. It's just after the... I can keep going though. So 60 feet, they already have a dock that's over 60 feet in length. It's I-shaped, and it's about 66 feet long with the gangway, and that makes their constructed area 531 square feet. And they are requesting a 65-foot extension, which would make their dock 131 feet long and the square footage of it 964.55 square feet. So that is about 388 square feet over their allowed 576 based on their shoreline frontage. So they're requesting a variance to 4 sections of the Lakeshore Protection Code. The total constructed area 1331F, and then 1331F2, so excess constructed area and impervious cover is prohibited as it may affect water quality, detract from aesthetic values of the shoreline, and alter natural shoreline characteristics. And then 1331K5A and D pertain to dock length. So if the water depth at 60 feet from low water is less than 4 feet in depth and cannot be moved to a location to achieve 4 feet, then the total dock length may be increased to a point at which the water depth equals 4 feet, but not to exceed 100 feet in length. So they're asking for that variance to be over 100, and then that's essentially what K5D states as well, the 100-foot length. So again, they're requesting a 65-foot extension to make the dock 131 feet long. They did submit a water depth profile. If you want to click one more, Michelle, please. So their depth at existing 66 feet is at low water is only 2 feet 2 inches. So they are below that 4-foot depth. At 100 feet into the lake, their depth is 2 feet 6 inches. And then at their proposed depth of 131 feet, they get 40.44 inches or 3.3 feet. So if they went to 100 feet long dock, they would gain about 5 inches of depth, where their 131-foot long dock would gain them about 14 inches of depth at low water, based on the profile there. And low water is an elevation, so 2,996 is the low water elevation for Whitefish Lake. And the committee may consider approving the variance for the dock extension up to 100 feet and denying the 131-foot length. So you'd still be granting a variance for constructed area if that was the case, since they're at 100 feet or 131, they're still over their allowed constructed area. So again, the 4 things for a minor variance: they have to show undue hardship, The water depth profile indicates that at the end of their existing 66-foot-long dock, at low water is only 2 feet 2 inches, so they're below that 4-foot threshold at low water. Additionally, the area surrounding the property is very shallow lake bed and narrow lot width, making the riparian boundary lines diverge further into the lake. These are site-specific, and strict enforcement of the regulations would result in hardship to the property owner, including being unable to use or launch personal watercraft during low water. However, during average water levels, the depth at 66 feet is approximately 4 feet. And at 100 feet, the applicant would gain 5 inches from that. During average water, so my finding is during average water, adequate depth is achieved. However, during low water, they're only at 2 feet 2 inches. This could be influenced by weather events and climate change over the years, and their lot is unique. So they do have a hardship. Any alternatives? Again, an alternative would be keeping the dock at the length that it is, or going only 100 feet instead of 131 feet and just having a constructed area variance versus length and constructed area. And there is no other location for the dock based on their shoreline, and excavating the lake is prohibited, so there's no other location that they can move the dock to achieve depth. Adverse impact on lake or lakeshore in terms of the criteria laid out there. It would not diminish water quality, diminish fish or wildlife habitat, mess with recreation. The Lakeshore Code does state that docks over 100 feet, the reason we have that rule is that it could interfere with navigation for neighboring docks. And based on aerials of this lot, they have plenty of space between their neighbors, so I don't think navigation would necessarily be a huge impact with this. And number 4, granting the variance would result in general and universal public benefit. The longer dock has no universal public benefit. So I found that they do not fully meet the criteria for a variance. Lakeshore also on February 9th unanimously voted to deny the application. And City of Whitefish staff also recommends denial for the 131-foot length. We recommended to Lakeshore Committee and to Council that you may consider approval with an amendment to allow 100 feet and not the 131 feet, which would make a 740 square foot dock instead of 964 square feet, and gain them 5 inches of depth at low water. It's a lot of numbers.
Yeah. You ready for questions now, if there are any? Any questions?
My only question is there a typical, when we determine the depth of the water at the end of the dock, do we consider it always at low water? Do we consider it at median water? How do we make that determination?
The people that go out and survey this, that's based on the elevation. So they take a survey elevation of the lake bed. And they do it late in the season too, where the lake is at low water. But it's all based on, so the low water elevation is 2,996, and then you can see the elevation lines on the vertical axis. So the blue line is literally the bottom of the lake, and that's the elevation points that the surface of the lake shore or the lake bed hits. So,
I get that part, but when we're determining whether or not you need an extension on your dock, do we use the low water
yes,
as the
regulations
determining
are
point?
based on low.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Ben.
Do you happen to know what the length is of the adjacent neighbor docks to this property?
The applicant may. I do not have that info.
I'm sorry, Kate. Maybe you could come to the mic to answer that, because we can't record it and nobody can hear you except us. That's all right.
So I was involved on the property to the north. Unfortunately, I was not involved in the dock portion of that property, so I can't speak specifically to the length of the neighboring dock. I would guess, since I've been on that property, that you're looking at the full 60 feet allowable to the property owner in that location. Due to the shape of the lake shore in this area, it does kind of draw back for this subject property that we're speaking of. So it wouldn't protrude as far from an aerial standpoint any further than the neighboring dock to the north.
Okay.
If that
Did I
makes
answer
any
your question?
sense.
That was yours, correct, yeah. Does that get you? Any questions for Jessica or Kate?
Questions for Jessica, actually. So at 100 feet, they're basically just pushing that riparian boundary to the north, correct? They're kind of like the corner of the dock's going to be at that riparian boundary pretty close. If I'm looking at the schematic here, because I'm going to pull 10, 10, 10. So that's 30 and then another 5, and that's basically about halfway through that fourth section from the end, correct? So
Yep, so they can be 20 feet, within 20 feet on either side of the riparian boundary for the regulations. So they're within that 20 feet of that on either side. So that's not a variance request there with the riparian boundaries. It's just,
and then at 100 feet, they would be 164 feet over for constructed area? That roughly about correct?
yes, yep, they would be 740 square feet would be the total square feet at 100, and they're allowed 576.
Yep, 164. Okay,
Yep.
thank you. That's my only question.
Any other questions for Jessica? Kate, I said I'll let you speak to this matter at this time, rather than public hearing, so have at it.
Thank you. Jessica really covered very thoroughly the situation here at this lot. This is a very shallow lake bed location, and the owner does have multiple watercraft that he would like to access his dock with. One of their watercraft in particular is very difficult to access their dock, given the lake bed conditions in this area. And they find it very challenging. They're having to dodge rocks and keep very close eye on underwater in that location as they approach their dock, especially as the summer continues and the water drops. Initially, I will say that we did submit this variance request at 100 feet in length. And I was advised to increase that to get the full foot of further clearance. So that is where we came to the 131 feet in length when we finally got the profile back from our surveyor of the lake bed. The owner is open and amenable to the 100-foot length if that is deemed allowable by the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Turn the matter back to council for a motion and discussion.
I'll make a motion
Sure.
to deny the variance request to 131 feet, but amend the application to a dock of 100 feet or less.
Is
I'll
there-
second.
Seconded by Councilor Fury. You want to speak to your motion?
Well, I just don't, 131 feet is a really long dock. And it's 500, double, 300, almost double or 3/4 as big as over the constructed limit. I understand the issue with, navigating watercraft in there, and unfortunately, that's the lot you have, and that's the lakeshore depth, and we'll go out to what our regulations require, or allow, but I think that's a fair compromise on this site.
Yeah, just really quickly, yeah, there's no way I could support the 131 feet. goes completely through the 10-foot riparian boundary, and I know how Lakeshore works pretty well, and it does get to be a navigational hazard for neighbors coming in and out when there's boats moving, and somebody's got a buoy out there, and then they've got their raft floating out there, and it's really, it would be a huge problem, and I don't think that that should be allowed. I agree with Steve, you know, it's like it is their lot, and that's kind of what you buy, and that's a little bit caveat emptor, I'm afraid. It's like you get what you buy, but what I am concerned about is, having lived on the lake for over 32 years, is we're seeing consistently much lower water every year, and I don't think this is the first time we're going to see this, and I think it's something that needs to be discussed at planning, it needs to be discussed at the Lakeshore Protection Committee, because we're going to see more and more of these, I guarantee you, all along that shore. They're not unique in that. People aren't unique within Monk's Bay. They're not unique with it in front of the Atkinson's house. It's going to be a problem, and I think it's something we need to really look at, but I think 100 feet is more than enough, so.
Any other comments on the motion? All those in favor of the motion, raise your hand. All those opposed, like sign. That matter passes as amended unanimously. Next item, we have communication from Parks and Recreation. Resolution, I think, would be 2204, a resolution to approve amendments to the Glacier Twins lease agreement. And Maria.
Good evening. My staff report is on page 291 of your packet. In October of 2002, the City of Whitefish entered into a long-term lease with the Glacier Twins for the baseball stadium in Memorial Park. The base term for this lease was set for 25 years with the option to renew for 2 consecutive terms of 15 years each, and that started in January 1st of 2003. So the time is not up on that lease yet. In addition to the long-term lease, the Park Board also entered into an MOU with the Twins on August 29th of 2014 to address the specifics of the construction of a Verizon tower within the Twins leased area. And that MOU amended the long-term lease to update the insurance clause, changing liability coverage from $1 million to $1.5 million. Also, the MOU identified the terms in which the lease revenue from the Verizon tower would be allocated to the Twins. That MOU expired in 2019, and between 2019 and 2021, the Park Board held 5 public meetings to discuss the future allocation of the funds, as well as several meetings with representatives of the Twins to negotiate the terms of the new MOU. At the November 2021 Park Board meeting, the Park Board moved unanimously to direct staff to present the Twins with a revised MOU, which among several other things identified that the receipt of Verizon lease funds by the Glacier Twins was contingent upon the successful renegotiation of the long-term lease, to include the Park Board's authority of approval over other organizations or entities to sublease the stadium land from the Twins. This amendment was successfully negotiated between the Park Board and the Twins, as both parties agreed that the Park Board has a vested interest in the use of the land by any entity. Additionally, the lease must be amended to update the insurance clause, changing our liability coverage from $1 million to $1.5 million, as the MOU in which this change was previously made has now expired. In practicality, this amendment should be recorded with a lease and not with an MOU. As this lease is a long-term lease between the City of Whitefish and the Glacier Twins, the lease amendment requires approval of the City Council. The MOU is a 5-year agreement with options to renew for 3 successive 5-year terms and is an agreement between the Park Board and the Glacier Twins. Upon City Council's approval of the lease amendment, the Park Board will be able to act on the approval of the MOU. There is no financial requirement for the amendment of the lease, and I do respectfully recommend that you adopt this resolution amending the Glacier Twins long-term lease of stadium land at Memorial Park. And I can answer any questions.
Any questions for Maria? And just to confirm, Maria, the Park Board did approve this.
That is correct.
Steve, any comment? I'll turn it back to the council for a motion.
I would make a motion, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that we approve resolution. I believe we would be at 2203 at this point, and that's a resolution to approve the amendments to the Glacier Twins lease agreement.
And I second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on the matter? Not seeing any. All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed, like sign. Matter passes unanimously. Thank you. Let's see, next item, communication from Public Works Director. No, a bid
Frank,
on
I
the
have one
Armory,
more.
Armory Park, excuse me. Consideration of authorization to bid Armory Park Master Plan Phase 3.
My staff report for this agenda item is on page 318 of your packet. This evening, I'm requesting authorization to bid the Armory Park Master Plan Phase 3. The preliminary park design was approved by the Park Board in 2019 when we sought to apply for and were awarded a land water conservation grant to complete Phase 3 of the master plan. Through our work with RPA and Northwest Design Studio, we brought forth a final design that was approved by the Park Board in October of 2021. In preparation for the bidding process, we've broken out components of the plan into a base bid and several additive alternates to provide flexibility in funding this project. Since the staff report in your packet was written, I and the consultants have opted for a few more additive alternates, and so I'll review those with you. The base bid does still consist of an interior loop trail around the perimeter of the park, a parking lot on the southeast corner of the park, irrigation improvements throughout the northeast quadrant of the park, and drainage improvements along the eastern edge of the park. Additive alternate 1 is for a new well, power, and pump control assembly to provide water source for the irrigation of the park. Additive alternate 2 adds a section of the loop path connecting asphalt around the Armory building. Additive alternate 3 identifies benches within the park. Additive alternate 4 is for native trees consistent with the approved landscape master plan. Additive alternate 5 is an interior path that will provide access to the center of the park from the southern parking area. Additive alternate 6 identifies a path in the new southern section of the WAG Park. Additive alternate 7 is to complete drainage improvements at the east entrance of the WAG Park. And additive alternate 8 is to add landscaping around the drainage improvements in the WAG Park. And I should note that the funds for the WAG Park improvements would be fundraised by the WAG Board. Additive alternate 9 is for temporary irrigation necessary to establish native landscaping in areas that will not need irrigation after roots have taken hold. And finally, additive alternate 10 is for temporary fencing to protect seeded areas from foot traffic while seed is germinating. Assuming staff is authorized to proceed with bidding, we plan to advertise for bids March 20th and 27th with an opening date of April 7th. If bids come in close to expected, I will come back to the council to seek approval to award the project to the lowest qualified bidder. However, if bids appear inflated given the current market, we may choose to not award bids at that time and instead rebid the project at a later date, as we have allowed for that flexibility in our schedule, and the LWCF grant does allow for that as well. If we do have a successful bidding process, though, construction is planned to begin June 27th with completion in late August. With the updates on the additive alternates, the updated preliminary construction cost estimate is now $766,400, with the base bid totaling $564,300 and the additive alternates totaling $202,100. We currently have $572,100 budgeted through the LWCF grant, resort tax, impact fees, parkland acquisition and development, and the stormwater fund. Additional available funds have been identified in resort tax, parkland acquisition and development, impact fees, and the Parks General Fund, and through WAG board fundraising. Based on the outcome of the bids, we'll evaluate the actual construction costs and then come back to the council with a recommendation. It should be noted that this is one of the council goals for FY22 and a necessary step to completing the Armory Park Master Plan. And therefore, I respectfully request authorization to proceed with the bidding of the Armory Park Master Plan as presented in this report and as provided by the as approved by the Park Board of Commissioners. And I can answer any questions.
Any questions for Maria on this matter? Rebecca?
Thank you, Maria. I just was wondering, with the drainage improvements, would that make the pond a little bit cleaner? Sometimes it looks really algae-ish and kind of darker than it might. Is there any way to improve that through this plan?
Are you referring to the Wag Park pond?
Yeah.
The drainage improvements would not impact the Wag Park pond. They do work on the algae in coordination with checking with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. I think that it is through an artesian well, and there's future plans in phase 4 to change that well and provide more water source, which may clean that up in the future.
Yeah, I just was approached by someone whose dog got sick drinking the water, and so I don't know how we're testing it, but okay. Well, as long as we have plans to improve it, thank you.
Any other questions for Maria on this matter? With that, I'll turn it back to council for a motion. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I would make a motion to authorize to bid Armory Park Master Plan Phase 3.
And I second it.
Okay, motion by Councilor Cornell, seconded by Councilor Giuseppe. Any comments or discussion on the motion? All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed, like sign. Matter passes unanimously. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
Next up on our agenda is communication from Public Works Director. This is a new one for me. I don't think I've seen this before. This is a rejection of a construction bid for the Spokane Avenue Water Main Replacement Project. Craig?
Yeah, I think this is a new one for a lot of us. But I'll run through the staff report and then we can have some discussion. I think everyone's aware that Spokane Avenue is home to one of the oldest cast iron water mains in the city. We've been working on the design and bidding to replace this water main for several months now. Council awarded the engineering contract for the project to Morrison Merrily last November, and the initial project design and material procurement was approved by council on January 3rd of this year. A considerable amount of effort has taken place since that meeting in January. We advertised for pre-qualification of general contractors with a total of 6 contractors applying. We did qualify all 6 contractors to complete the work. We bid the material procurement and opened those bids on January 10th. 2 bids were received, and Northwest Pipe Fittings was the low bidder for the materials at $568,010. This was well below the engineer's estimate, and that contract was awarded. We held a public open house for the project on February 9th and did a contractor pre-bid meeting on February 10th. We then advertised for construction bids twice on February 6th and February 13th. And then on February 24th, we received only 1 bid for the project. The bid was from Sandry Construction in the amount of $3,402,963. This was about 70% over our estimate for the project, which was $2 million for the construction of the project. So the total project costs were originally estimated at $2.45 million, which in the budget is proposed to be paid with $1 million of city cash and $1.45 million in ARPA funds, which we have. The estimated cost to complete the project with this current construction bid would be about $4.27 million, which is $1.8 million or 74% over our budget. So the bidding period did allow a standard amount of time for contractors to prepare their bids, and there were no formal requests from any of the qualified contractors to extend the bid period. The time frame outlined in the project required the contractor to complete the project by this June, the end of June 2022, and we heard from several of the pre-qualified contractors that they didn't bid on the project because of the short construction window and conflicts with previously contracted work. So it's the opinion of city staff and Morrison Merrily that allowing contractors to start the project this fall and complete the work by May 31st of next year will attract more competition and provide the city with more cost-effective construction costs. So it is staff's recommendation that council reject the bid from Sandry Construction, the amount of $3,402,963, and authorize staff to rebid the project for completion next May.
Thanks, Craig. Questions for Craig? Rebecca.
Craig, when you say start in the fall, what would they be doing in the fall and to prepare?
Yeah, so we'd essentially build the project in two phases. The goal would be to get the southern portion done this fall, so likely work from, let's say, 6th Street south to 13th Street. That water main would be replaced and the roadway would be restored. And then next spring, they'd come in and build the northern section. So our goal would be to build the southern half during the fall, which is presumably the busier season, where traffic is easier to manage.
Thank you.
Steve?
It's my understanding, Craig, that we've already started procuring the materials. Is that correct?
We have, yes.
Okay, so you already have laid out some money to get this project started?
Yeah, we did. We awarded that bid for the material procurement in February, and we already have most of the pipe. It's already arrived.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Craig, is that approach of doing part of it this year and part of it next year going to end up with a much longer period of time of having Spokane closed than if we did this all as one giant project?
It's going to result in about an extra month of traffic control. We won't be closing Spokane Avenue at all during this project. We'll remain open to at least one-way traffic. I'm pretty sure in that southern segment we have enough room where we can actually maintain two-way traffic, but the northern segment, it's going to be flagged one-way traffic. But essentially, instead of building it in 3 months this spring, we'll be building it in 2 months this fall and 2 months next spring.
Giuseppe?
Craig or Dana, if we did it that way, will the budget allocation change, giving us more breathing space, part of it being in 2022, part of it being in 2023, or we accrue the whole expense at the end, at the beginning, as construction goes?
Fall, and if we do it in the fall and then spring, it'll all be within one fiscal year, in fiscal year 23, because we run July through June.
Yeah, with the exception of the engineering and materials that we're spending this year.
I'm hoping this results in something good. Motions on the table?
Yes, Deputy Mayor, I move to reject the construction bid for Spokane Avenue water main replacement as presented by the staff.
Seconded by Councilor Norton. Any further discussion on the matter? All those in favor, raise your hand. Otherwise, all those opposed, like sign. Seeing none, matter passes unanimously. Onward, Craig. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up on our agenda is what I think is our resolution 2205, if I've counted it correctly, a resolution to approve an amendment to the 2004 lease agreement with Project Whitefish Kids.
Good evening. So my staff report begins on page 351 of the packet. The city has enjoyed, as Gloria referenced, a long and fruitful relationship with Project Whitefish Kids. Back in 2004, PWK donated approximately 51 acres of land It's known as Smithfields to the city. And in return, the city leased Smithfields back to PWK for operation as a youth sports facility. The lease expires in October of this year, but it had an option to extend for 3 consecutive terms of 5 years each. The lease gives PWK exclusive use of Smithfields to maximize its availability for use by youths. And over the years, as you guys are likely aware, PWK has invested substantial time and money in Smithfields, and it's really resulted in a valuable asset to the city. As you guys are probably also aware, North Valley Music School has been looking for a new home for the past several years. And last year, the city, PWK, and North Valley Music School began discussing the possibility of the music school leasing a portion of Smithfields and building a new school on it. The parties originally discussed amending the lease with PWK to just kind of carve out the area that North Valley Music School was going to lease. But it turns out because Smithfields were conveyed to PWK to the city on the condition that the land conveyed shall be used primarily for recreational purposes, if the city were directly to lease any portion of Smithfields to North Valley Music School, it would have to be approved by a majority of vote at an election called for that purpose. So a little bit of a wrinkle, holding an election, I think the community would be supportive, but it did raise concerns with respect to timing and some certainty for North Valley Music School to be able to finance the construction of the new school. So as such, because the lease we currently have with PWK allows it to sublet Smithfields, or a portion of Smithfields with the city's consent, we decided that was a little bit more an easier way to go, and we wanted to make some amendments to the current lease agreement to allow that, and just to kind of contain some housekeeping amendments, because it's been in effect for 20 years and things come up in 20 years. So the proposed amendments to the lease would provide a 7-year term with an additional option to extend for 10 years. And we kind of wanted a long term to enable North Valley Music School to obtain the financing it needs. Also, I think in consideration of the improvements, substantial time and money PWK has put into Smithfields, I don't see us wanting to take back Smithfields at any time in the near future. I think Maria would probably agree. It also allows PWK to permit use of the fields by adult athletic activities, subject to the goal of maximization for youth sports. Kind of the way the lease reads now is PWK isn't really allowed to have regular adult sporting events out there. They want that option if indeed they can do it and not impact youth sports. It allows but does not require the city to contribute funding for Smithfields. I think you all may recall several years ago when the city contributed to some playground equipment on Smithfields. We actually had to go through and I think do a lease amendment at that point. It clarifies insurance requirements. The old lease just required PWK to provide insurance for the city if it was having like group sporting events there, and I think for years we've covered Smithfields, they've covered Smithfields, so it just clarifies those requirements. It requires PWK to require entities using Smithfields to carry general liability insurance, naming the city as an additional insured. And again, that's been something that has been in place for several years. They've just been doing that even though the lease didn't necessarily require them to. The original lease does not allow alcoholic beverages to be served at Smithfields. And again, I think you guys will recall a few years ago when Oktoberfest wanted to locate at Smithfields, we had to go through and actually do a one-time lease amendment allowing alcohol to be served there. So the proposed lease agreement allows alcoholic beverages to be served in conjunction with fundraising events conducted or approved by PWK. I think there might have been some interest in holding Oktoberfest there in the future. And it also requires in a city to be an additional insured under special event insurance if alcohol is going to be served as part of fundraising events. It provides for city approval and fixtures exceeding $25,000. the original lease required any improvements to have city approval. I don't think we're really that worried about it at this point, but anything over $25,000, the city would have to at least look at and approve. It deletes a few provisions of the lease agreement that I don't think we've ever complied with, specifically PWK submitting yearly financial reports to the city, which they've never done, we've never asked for. PWK to pave access roads already paved, and requiring PWK to connect to the city's water main, and requiring PWK to hold a yearly meeting with neighboring property owners, which has never been asked for, to my knowledge, by the property owners or done. So those are just kind of a little bit of housekeeping amendments to it. North Valley Music School and PWK have, or are in the process of negotiating a commercial sublease agreement, which I also provided as the packet. It allows North Valley Music School to construct and operate a youth facility building within a portion of Smith Fields, and it provides that North Valley Music School will be solely responsible for constructing, maintaining, and operating the building, and that the building should be approved and reviewed by PWK in the city prior to construction. Will have to go through ARC review as well. And that upon termination of the sublease, use facilities building, along with any other improvements, will revert to the city, become the property of the city. There are no immediate financial impacts of approving the proposed lease amendments, and staff does recommend that the city council approve the amendment to the lease agreement and authorize City Manager Smith to execute it. As a side note, this was a super fun project to work on. PWK and North Valley Music School, I think, have gone above and beyond for youth, and they were really fun to work with. It was very collaborative. So I don't often get to say that in my job.
Any questions? Angie, I have one.
Sure.
I look at, for example, the lease that we had, and this is a different matter, with the twins as a 22-year lease, and we found out pretty quickly that we might have been able to do better, and we would like to have amended it, but that's just not going to work out. I don't want this to be that case, and I'm not sure we're in that position here, but it does occur to me, just one thing that's, we clarify the insurance requirements as required now. What happens in 15 years or 20 years when those change? Are we going to be able to amend this, or is it going to have, for lack of an adjustment that can be made as part of the...
Yeah, and I mean, we actually had that conversation, Frank, and, if both parties agree, they can amend the lease at any time, but actually PWK did insert into section 30 that upon 30 days written in notice and request by a party to renegotiate the terms, any provision may be modified by written agreement. So we did particularly build that in there, realizing that 70 years is a long lease.
Right. I guess my question is particularly with respect to the insurance requirements, we've raised those over the years as a result of, for lack of the insurance that we can carry or that we can get to insure the city, so that we don't have any deductible involved and that kind of thing. Do we want to put a rider in there or some kind of language that says, should under some conditions the city be required to raise your insurance requirements to mitigate any costs or reductions or increases in its deductibles, that it'll be so raised? I mean, do we want to do something like that?
I'm comfortable not doing that. I think we, required 1 million limits, and then when Mary Van Buskirk, my predecessor, stepped in, she changed it to 1.5 because that's our tort cap as a city. So I'm comfortable, with the renegotiation clause in there if for some reason that tort cap were to go away, God forbid, or, for some reason it were to be higher, that we could open that back up. I mean, it certainly, behooves us all to carry enough insurance if anything were to occur out there.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think that something we're going to have to come to grips with is, given the cost of living, given when that cap was put in, it would not be unreasonable for that cap to be raised based on a CPI or something else at some point in the not too distant future. I mean, it's just like $1.5 million today in what it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Yeah, and I guess I would keep in mind too that with respect to our insurance, we actually have insurance if the tort cap were to go away up to, well, I don't actually want to say that in public, more than 1.5 million.
Okay, okay.
I don't want anyone to get any ideas.
Right, okay, well, good. Then that answers that question. We're in good shape then. Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this matter? I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I move to approve the amendment to the 2004 lease agreement with Project Whitefish Kids, Inc. as presented by staff.
We have a motion by Councilor Giuseppe and seconded by Councilor Noten. Any further discussion on the matter? All right.
I just would like to thank everybody that works on these projects. It's really fantastic for the community. And I'm glad Angie had fun with it.
Actually, to that regard, I think we should send her the bill. She's not supposed to have fun.
Something like that, yeah. All those in favor of the motion, raise your hand. All those opposed, like sign. Motion passes unanimously. Now we'll move on to written communications from our city manager. Dana?
Tonight, I have nothing to add unless you have questions on my report.
Any questions for Angie on her report? Boy, that was good. Anything to report since your report was written?
I do not at this point. We are just knee-deep in budgeting, and so that's what we're working on.
Humming along, we'll call
Yes,
that.
trying to find a finance director in the meantime, so doing 2 jobs.
Yeah, okay. Next on our matter is communications from mayor and city councilors. The first item is consideration of approval of the tentative fiscal year 23 budget calendar.
Would you guys like me to just review it for you real quick? So on the, trying to get up on my calendar. We did make some amendments to our budget calendar. Usually we have our budget to you, I have my proposed budget to you by the first meeting in May. I have since delayed that just given the time constraints that I'm facing with no finance director. It is actually becoming exceedingly harder every day to manage both positions, but 2 dates that are very important for the council, aside from when we actually get to the budget, are the tentative budget work sessions. So May 31st is the first tentative budget meeting, and then June 13th. So those are important because our departments get to review their proposed budgets with you. We should have the budget to you on May 2nd, but again, I probably will be asking for an extension past that. Maybe 2 weeks or so, as we did last time we were without a finance director. And then the final, we'll hold a public hearing on the budget for the preliminary budget on June 20th, and then the final budget hearing will be on August 15th. So unless you have any concerns with this, it's a pretty standard calendar. Just for dates, though, if you guys have issues with those tentative budget meetings, those would be the ones that we should discuss now.
Any thoughts or comments on our tentative schedule?
Question, are those all after regular business hours?
Yes, so we hold them as a regular work session
That's what I
time, so
thought. Okay.
5:30 I think is almost.
Just wanted to double check, thank
Yep.
you.
Just a quick question. Are those dates in here working with all the surveys that we did? The doodle question?
Nope, so those are different meetings. So I do initial meetings. Those are actually the ones that are up in March where I meet with the council and the mayor, and smaller groups just to kind of give an idea of what I'm seeing and what my concerns are, get just a little bit minor feedback so what I propose isn't completely off the wall. These are going to be full-on work sessions with the council, the public attending, all of it, just to go through what we've proposed as the budget. You can make changes, provide direction on making changes to the preliminary budget before the public hearing that way.
Any other questions for Dana? Would entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, I would move to approve the tentative fiscal year 23 budget calendar.
And I second it.
Motioned and seconded, no further discussion, I presume. All those in favor, raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. Matter passes unanimously. And we've got a calendar. Good. Next item is a letter of support for the Northwest Montana Drug Force.
So we've gotten the request to provide a letter of support for the Northwest Montana Drug Task Force. We have participated with this program for some time. And I believe, Bridger could probably speak to the benefits of this, but the letter does as well. And we also heard support this earlier in this meeting during public comment. This is just for them as they apply for future funding opportunity, and would like the council as a whole to review it for Deputy Mayor's signature.
I have no problems with it. I just would like to add, I worked with them when I was working for Child and Family Services, and it was the kind of work that they do is extremely important in our community, and it's very, very tough work that they do. So any support we can give them, I think, is well justified.
Dana, do you need a motion to this effect, or just hot nods from everybody?
I think just the consensus nod that you guys are okay with the letter going out.
Everybody's
Okay.
good with that?
Okay.
Seeing nothing but nods, I think I'll take that unanimously. So let's do it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next item is to continue our discussion from February 22nd work session for available zoning and possible locations for workforce housing.
Mr. Deputy Mayor,
Yes,
can
sir.
I move to it for a quick recess, being 9 p.m.?
That would be fine. I think we can, we'll recess for about 10 minutes and then come back. So we'll come back at 5 after 9, if that's all right. Good? Thank you. We'd like to call this council meeting back to order and proceed with the matters at hand. Can I have order in the room, please? Thank you. The matter in front of us is a continued discussion from February 22nd work session for available zoning and possible locations for workforce housing. My recollection from this matter, and just at least to set the stage for our discussion here, was that we didn't really get into the matter itself. What we decided was, or what we requested was, that we wanted to talk about at some point what current available zoning would accommodate possible locations for workforce housing, among other things. And I don't know, so Dave, if you've got something you want to talk to us about before we have this discussion, I
don't have a lot to add. I mean, there are some locations around the city where we can do infill existing housing. We had that little discussion earlier about, do we want to, push for our housing south of Highway 40? For new workforce housing, that's a potential location. It is a long ways from downtown and will obviously increase traffic running into town and things like that. Anytime you put your high density out on the fringes of a community, you run into some of those issues, but there is available land out there. We talked about, I think there's a question from some of the developers, well, if you don't want it here or you don't want it here, where do we want it in this community? And, I'd like to get some kind of policy feedback from the council on that. Maybe this is something they can go to the Housing Steering Committee for them to research and come back with some potential ideas. We can work on kind of coming up with some numbers on how much, development could happen on some of those infill lots that we identified, total numbers of units. Again, so much of that is really dependent on the property owners and developers and what's for sale, what isn't for sale, and all that sort of stuff. So it's, hard to estimate how long that stuff might take to get developed, because some of it may never get developed. If somebody's using it as a field or for their horses or whatever, until somebody dies, and generally then something might happen. But, so yeah, I don't have a lot of ideas, we just were trying to get some feedback from you. You guys, wanted to talk about it, and so we brought some stuff to you. I'm not sure what, your guys' agenda is as far as discussing this stuff, but, we just tried to lay out some different areas where potential might happen in the future, some areas where, the zoning is gonna have to change to make that possible. But when it comes to, where there is developable property, where it's not steep slopes or high groundwater, those are issues in a lot of areas in the city. Make it somewhat more difficult. We're much more constrained than the city of Kalispell is, for instance, on where housing can go.
Sure.
I reviewed my notes. And I refreshed my memory a little bit, which is failing me. But there are a couple things that I think, at least from my perspective, I would like us to take a look at our corridors, our transportation corridors, places that have good access to trails and are not too far from town first. And I think those areas should be really looked at in terms of what the zoning is out there versus what it maybe should be. And we've done some of that along 2nd Street West. We've done some zone changes along there, but I think there's other connectivity to that area that we need to look at. Those major that's just one example, but the major transportation corridors, I think, is a thing that is something we should be looking at. I also think we need to take a close look at this idea of community character, because we do have, and we currently have a lot of stuff that's where the underlying zoning is not, if it were built to by what could be done there by right, it would change the character of that community. And instead of us downzoning like we did on, what was that, Kalispell, because the people wanted to retain that character, that kind of, as you've mentioned before, it kind of takes away our ability to provide dense housing close to the downtown, which is where we need it, because that fits in with our climate action plan, it fits in with our transportation plan. We want to encourage people to not drive. So so I think we need to take a look at what that means, that idea of community character, and really kind of figure out how to accommodate these underlying zoning issues versus what is on the ground there, because what's happening is the city is changing around us, and we're holding on to this idea that certain places should only be single family, even though a long time ago we zoned them for something more dense. And then the neighbors all come out and they don't want anything to change in their neighborhood, but we have a growth plan that is in conflict with what's on the ground, and I think we need to really sort out that problem. I don't know how to do it or how we approach that, but that's something that is really holding us back on all of these projects that we've looked at. The other thing I think we need to look at is our infrastructure, and we need to start, we talk a lot about our physical infrastructure all the time, but we don't talk about the human infrastructure at all. And there is a human infrastructure piece here that I think we're missing, and that is going to change our town drastically if we lose this human infrastructure of our wage earners, our people like Iraq, who was on that one, who spoke up in that one meeting, who has one of the handful of homes that are run through the housing authority. And he still is a bartender and, plays in the band, or sings. And he's still able to live here, but people like that are not able to come here anymore and survive. And if we lose that piece of our human infrastructure, I think, we have to start talking about those kind of things. And then the other thing that strikes me a lot is what Rhonda Fitzgerald has brought up many times, is that, we want to integrate our workforce housing into our community rather than build it in these concentrated areas. And the only place we're getting any density or any multiple units is in concentrated pockets. And that is not, that goes against what our growth policy is. And so when we have large donors that want to come in and help us, I would like to see us be able to push them towards areas that we've identified as, well, instead of just doing one big housing project where we're going to put 100 workforce housing units in one place, here's 3 potential areas where we would like to redevelop with workforce housing in those areas rather than concentrating it, because then we end up with this 2 sides of the track sort of thing in our town, which we do not want to cultivate. And that's not part of our growth policy. So with all that said, I think one of the big things we need to do is finally just update the growth policy. But we also need to really focus on places. So that's like a 1.5 to 2 year process. I don't think we can do it with the staff, the current staffing. I think we need to hire a consultant and just get it done. We should have plenty of money to do it. And then the other thing that we need to do is find these identifiable areas where, this place, this is a little pocket where we should look at, there's a one single family home there that was built in the 30s, and you could put 4 duplexes there instead. So, and I would like to see us do some sort of analysis of what we have on the ground now and how that could change into that infill piece, so that if we do get a wealthy donor that wants to come in and help us out, that we can say, well, instead of this one big project, let's look at these 3 more moderate projects. So hopefully that gives some direction on at least a place to go. But that's what I recollect coming to the last meeting with, so.
Great, thanks, Steve. Any thoughts, Andy?
Yeah, just a couple. I agree with Steve and with what Rhonda's point was about smaller integrated projects throughout the community. I think that was certainly one of the goals of our Legacy Homes program, was like, we want you to build these on site. We don't want you to give us the money, although obviously people wanted to give us the money. And I think we certainly learned from Mountain Gateway that people don't want one big giant project. But I think there's something we need to be conscious of too, and this is the hard part of it, and it's part of what Steve's getting at also, I think, is, so we say we need 1,000 new units. Okay, so we need 1,000 new units. Well, if they're 2 and 3 bedroom units, that's 3,000 more people in our community. That's a almost 25% increase in our population. So we have to be, I mean, there's a balancing act here that I think we need to really look at, and because we talk about community character, well, community character, this is not the same community with 15,000 people living in it, or 20,000. So, you know, but without providing the housing, then we can't get the people that we need, and I think that's a tricky part. So I think you're right, Steve. I think we need to find out what's actually out there. We need to look at these neighborhoods and see what a maximum build-out would be given the existing zoning. And I don't know if anybody happened to read the Interlake on Saturday. Did you read the Interlake on Saturday? So there was it's a conservative think tank or research group in Helena, largely sponsored by the Republican Party, and they issued a very large report. And basically in their report is what's killed the housing market in Montana is single-family residential zones. And one of their suggestions is that the state legislature passes a law that says we eliminate single-family residential zoning statewide. I pretty much, based on that article and what they said, we're gonna see that bill, I think, in the legislature next time. It's the governor's pushing that direction, and their idea is that affordable housing is strictly a supply problem, period. And so that's something I think we should kind of have on our radar as we go through this exercise a little bit, because maintaining neighborhood character may not be up to us anymore. It may be up to the state legislature and what we have out there. But that said, it doesn't mean we stick our head in the sand and wait for something to happen. But I really do think that, you know, we've got to look at as many options as we can within our existing zones and within our existing neighborhoods. I mean, whether that's ADUs, whether it's tiny houses, whether it's smaller lots, I think we have to go in part also through, I think, an educational process is, you know, we have the Nathans out there of the world that are looking at these problems as the people that are buying those houses are trying to find places to live. And, you know, we've got to convince this community that we need the housing. I think that's a big step in this process. If we can't do that, we're never going to get neighborhood buy-in, and without neighborhood buy-in, we're not going to get the projects we need. I mean, that's been the case for 20 years, unfortunately. You know, I think hopefully it's gotten to be a big enough problem now that people do understand it, right up until it's the project next door. You know, and that's the tricky part. I mean, that's always going to be, I think, the biggest hurdle that we face, quite frankly. So, anyway, that's just a few thoughts. But
that is coming as well next month after the next planning board meeting, just so you know.
Giuseppe, you can go next.
Few semantics here. In this report, we're talking about sometimes we're talking about multifamily zoning for workforce housing. So let's keep that term just 1 second up here in the parking lot. As legislators here, the knobs we can turn, I think, are zoning, regulations, work, maybe looking at the fire code in maybe certain designated areas, and exceptions to setbacks, admin authorization for ADUs. I'll give you an example. I live in a lot that it's defined as a flag lot, and I cannot put a tiny home in front of my house because I only can put it in the back. You know, if I did not have that restriction, I might put a tiny home in front and rent it forever. Low income, I don't care if that can help. So that's an example of a regulation or a zoning regulation that it's a knob that we can turn. We cannot turn knobs where we appropriate land or tell people to build. We need to prepare the canvas so that this can happen. I agree with you that we need to be aware that we're going to have side effects or unintended consequences. And your point about growing the population by almost 50%, it's probably one of the possible scenarios that we might see happen. unless there is a self-balancing of the market, which I do not know where it would go. So having said all of this, the discussion we're trying to have here and the problem we're trying to address is about, I think, enabling and incenting property owners and developers to build more dwellings within a unit of space at a more reasonable cost. If that's the discussion we're having, that's beautiful, and I'm all for it. But let's be clear, this is not addressing or talking about affordable housing, because affordable housing is defined in a certain way. This is the discussion I see here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is just what I said, and that's why we're saying here multifamily zoning for workforce housing, because workforce housing is not defined legally. It's a term that we all agree that we understand. That means what I in jargon call Model T homes, like the Ford Model T. So we're not defining it legally. I think we're trying to discuss, again, a canvas. So say, for instance, we rezoned where my property is WRS and make it W4. Maybe G-Man might build 2 more duplexes there, and out of his good heart, he might decide to sell them at a modest gain. But that's what we're talking about. Am I correct?
I think we're talking about more than that, Giuseppe, but I think that's certainly a perspective that we need to think about in terms of what we're after or what we're trying to get to. So I concur. Ben?
So I want to start by reiterating a point that I said at the last time we discussed this, and that's that I feel we have a lot of underutilized property in this town. There's a lot. We need housing. We need affordable housing, yes. We need all housing right now. We need people to develop units, and right now it is very difficult to do so in town. I look at what was put together here, and I'm once again saying there are tons and tons and tons of housing units that would be acceptable to this community that are not currently allowed under the growth planning and zoning that we have in place. In a lot of ways, I see our current growth plan, map, standards, zoning, in many respects, is an impediment to responsible growth. We're not getting it. We're getting projects way in the really large concentrated projects in the wrong part of town because it's very hard to build middle density housing in a lot of places here in town. So one problem is the growth planning out of date, and yes, it is. And I think that in some ways we're paying for that now because the growth planning is so far out of date that it just simply does not reflect where I think this community is and what this community needs. So one part of this to me is we need to push to update the growth planning as quickly as it's possible to do, recognizing that it takes a long time. But I also ask, I don't know the answer to this, but I ask what, to your point, Giuseppe, we can't go in and start changing specific parcels of land and all that. That just sounds very difficult to me. I mean, do we have any larger things we can do? I mean, let me use a great example. I live several hundred yards away from here, very close to this, where we sit today. And my property is zoned WLR, which is the lowest possible zoning classification in town, and I can walk home. And that's crazy to me. It should not be that way. And that's just an example, though. But can we not, is there any solutions here that we can, in a larger scale than parcel by parcel, we can actually change how many housing units that can be built in a way that makes sense? I mean, another example, like Jerry Dunker's project, the Trailview. I can't think of a place in town where somebody shouldn't be able to build a Trailview. But hardly, I mean, maybe a few, but hardly any. But there's large swaths of town you can't even come anywhere close to that density, and those lot sizes are way too small. So I'm wondering if, I want to say that, in my opinion, one thing that we absolutely need to do is we need to push to get our growth policy updated now. Is one thing. And secondarily, I would like to know if we have, what can we do to help make incremental changes across zoning districts or across growth planning or something that can help alleviate this underutilization of land. I don't think having half-acre minimum lots, for example, makes sense anywhere in town. It doesn't. I think we should have, if you want to build a subdivision with quarter-acre lots or whatever, less, 0.17, 0.15, why is that a problem? And so that's an issue with that particular zoning district that happens to cover, you know, a bunch of land in here. And I know it's a complicated issue, but I think that we owe, you know, while I don't believe the Mountain Gateway project made sense, I think we're getting that because I think a lot of the other zoning and growth planning that we have in town also doesn't make sense. And I think that we owe it, and I think of the many points that were brought up in favor of that project, you know, one that is very good is the simple fact that there's nowhere to build that here. And I think we owe the community a better answer in terms of where is the housing going to go that's going to support the people that need to be here and that want to be here. And so I still find myself struggling for, you know, the exact, you know, let's go do this right now. But I think we need to, number one, push to update the growth policy as soon as we can. And I agree with Steve. I think we should consider if we can spend extra money to make it happen, then we should do that. It's one of the most important things this community needs from us right now, is that. And number two, what can we do in the short term? What levers, as Giuseppe said, can we adjust that in a broader sense can help, you know, now? Because I know that the growth policy process is going to take years. So there's my motivational speech, and hopefully we can find some ideas somewhere.
Rebecca, you have some thoughts?
So we wouldn't really be in this position if we weren't really successful at selling property. So the county has 1,000 short-term rentals that are legal, or some of them aren't legal, but that's what's counted. So I think sometimes I have heartache around this because we would not be in this shape if a group of individuals hadn't sued us to take away the donut, so that it would be deregulated and we would have no right to grow our town into that area. And then we also have competition from people that want to manage property and short-term rentals and mid-level rentals. So the people that are making tremendous amounts of money on real estate are not going to give that up. And that makes it a really difficult situation for us that are trying to solve the community's problems for housing workforce and people that have grown up here and all of that. That level of competition and this idea that deregulating everything is going to solve it is probably just going to make it much worse. So I think we're at the point where we are actually at subsidizing housing from now on. I think we need to be realistic about actually creating housing. And so what I would like is if we looked outside city limits, the Whitefish Housing Authority has the legal right to develop land into housing through their legal oversight outside the city limits. I'm not sure how far out we can go, but I think we need to look at things like that in terms of workforce housing and affordable housing. And I think we should have more detailed programs to help individual homeowners identify, like what Giuseppe was saying, is there any way that someone could create a basement apartment, could have a small home, could convert a garage, and we would incentivize that for them by helping them design it and take away normal restrictions. They'd still have to build things legally, you know, but I think that's another thing that we haven't really addressed much at all, is actually working with the people that own the homes here in town that might want to do that, but can't because of our current setbacks things like that. And, and I also feel like one of the reasons why we've been a successful town, that people do want to come and live here, is because we have charming neighborhoods. So I don't want the charming neighborhoods taken away. I think it makes our town, it's the reason why the people that actually live here love our town, is because they feel like home, and they're not, they're authentically beautiful to come home to, but also they create community so that people can get to know each other as neighbors and interact regularly and take care of each other as needed, and watch over each other. And so I think those are precious to our town. And the more that you impose someone's profit on people that are actually here to live and have a beautiful life, we might not have the same town in the long run if we don't protect those historic neighborhoods. So I think some of it's going to have to happen where you look at the size of lots and what's possible, but then we also have to look at what's going to happen if we impose something on a neighborhood that doesn't want it. Especially when we have lots of areas in the valley that housing could be brought. And I think we'll solve the problem. I love what the planning staff has come up with in terms of interviewing other resort areas that have come up with ideas. I know it's very frustrating that we've turned down a lot of affordable housing, especially for Wendy, who has to present them all the time. But part of our job is to listen to the public and do the will of the public. And if they say no, then we probably should be saying no too. So anyways, pretty soon we'll have a housing coordinator, and that will make a difference too. That's all.
Steve, sure.
I would just like to add a couple things. I appreciate your comments, Rebecca, and you're right, we can't leave any option off the table, but I think we need to focus on the city limits first. Part of what we want is, and part of what our other long-range planning documents, including our climate action plan, include, is that people are able to live here and not have to drive here to live. And I think one of the elephants in the room that hasn't been brought up is that part of the fear amongst our community is that because now we have these astronomical home prices that only people from the outside can afford to pay, is that we are turning into a resort community that we despise in other states like Colorado. Or not despise, but we don't want to become one of them. And what happened, particularly in Aspen, is that as the home prices went up, the people that actually did the work in Aspen got pushed down valley because that's where they could get housing. And now they have buses that run from those down valley areas that bus people in to work up there. And personally, I find that extremely, that is not what we want to become. And I don't know of anybody that I've ever talked to that lives here or has been here for a while that wants to see that sort of thing happening. If we hold on to this idea that we have to keep our neighborhoods exactly the same because that's the charm of our town, we don't end up with people like you and me owning those homes, which is what's happening. And that is exactly what we've experienced in the last couple of years. And talking about pushing our workforce out of town because that's where we can afford to build, we have to, in my opinion, we have to focus on our town first. And if people are being bussed in or driving in because that's the only place they can find, they're not going to come. Some of them won't come here. They'll work in Columbia Falls. They'll work in Kalispell. And the other thing is we won't have the same kind of charm anymore if we don't have wage earners living among the wealthier class in this town. And that is what has made Whitefish great. It's a working class town. It always has been until recently. It's become only for wealthy out-of-state people. So I think we need to think really carefully before we decide that we should invest any money in building denser housing outside of city limits.
With that said, I know we haven't given you much direction, Dave, and let me see if I can give me some heads or tell me what I think I'm hearing here is that we want to try to figure out, are there some places that we, given our history here, where we should be considering focusing or incenting some higher density that might allow for some workforce housing as opposed to affordable housing. I think the other thing that's pretty clear, Dave, and I think this would solve many of the problems, is that we probably all think that given the problems that we've been presented over the past several years, we probably need to have another look at the growth policy and do it sooner rather than later, and that process in and of itself is going to give us a pretty good flavor about what the tolerances are within the community for some of additional densities in some of our traditional neighborhoods. Is kind of what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing from council. And so as part of this discussion, maybe we think about, or you and Dana tell us, okay, we think this is a high priority. It's been a priority for the council for a long time. We haven't made much progress on it. I think we ought to just identify it for what it is. It's just something, it's a discrete project that takes a ton of time. And even if we have an additional long-term planner or somebody else in the planning staff, we got more work than we could say grace over in the interim 3 or 4 years coming at us. We just need to hire somebody to help us with the growth policy and get it started, so we can get some in and begin to get a feel for, I think, what the community will tolerate, and it will also help us identify in the short term, okay, is there some areas that we can and should be directing this kind of building in? Am I kind of, does this make sense to you guys? Is that a process that you could live with?
I would also say that in the short term, rather than just looking at the zoning map, also look at regulations and what's holding us back from, in the zoning code, that allows us to create more small for ADUs, those kind of things. And I know that's coming.
Right.
It'll be at the planning board in a couple weeks.
Right.
But if there's any other zoning or any other regulation that we have that's hindering us, that we could look at that.
Okay. I've got.
I mean, we're looking at some solutions like that. We have a housing coordinator that hopefully is going to be starting here in the next couple months. One of their focuses is going to be looking at our zoning code. How do we improve things? How do we make it easier for people to do housing? We're planning on starting the growth policy this fall. The update, once we have a couple little projects to get done, and we have to, again, hire another person that we just did a bunch of interviews last week. So we're working towards that. We have the ADU things coming. The housing steering committee is working on some different things to look at housing solutions. We could, schedule a work session. It'd probably have to be, in a month or so, where we could bring some idea of where, infill could happen and what kind of density some of that infill could bring to, further flesh out some of those things like the mayor talked about, our last discussion on this with the maps that we provided in the PowerPoint.
Yep.
Look at some of those areas. Those are the solutions that we're working on right now, unless you have other things. But
I think what I took away from it, I think those are all good steps, Dave. What I took away from our discussion was that really we need for us to be successful with this, we have to figure out what the community buy-in is.
Well, that's always the struggle, because anytime you want to change the density on somebody's neighborhood, no one wants it, right?
And that's my point, and that's why I think getting to the growth policy, beginning to bring the community back in to say, no, we got to talk about this, is probably it's not going to be the fastest, but it's probably going to be one of our best tools to actually get people convinced that it's the right thing to do. And so, but that's kind of what I think. I think
it's difficult because a lot of people, they talk about they want it, but they don't want it next to them. And
right. And I think Andy's correct, and I think, I'm not sure anybody here besides Andy had actually articulated that. I think is that to the extent we need, quote, need another 1,000 units, you add another 1,000 or 2,000 people to the population in this city, it will change it.
We're also losing
dramatically.
people, all those apartment buildings that are getting torn down, all the ones that are turning into long-range rentals. So, I mean, there's definitely an outflux of, the lower income people.
Right, and I get that, and I think we ought to be cognizant of that, but I do think, as part of this process, as we all consider this thing, adding another 20 or 30% to our population is going to change this place. And it's going to change the traffic patterns, and it's going to change everything about what we do. I think that's part of what we all got to consider here as we move forward. I want us to move forward, and I think the way we do that is my view, is through the things you're doing, Dave, and also getting started on this growth policy as quickly as we can. So we're trying to, and that's a learning process, and it's a convincing process, I think, for the group.
Well, yeah, we're going to have a staff member that their sole focus for the most of the, their initial part is housing. So we'll be able to devote a lot more energy to coming up with different solutions and ideas.
So from the growth policy standpoint, obviously we have staff scheduled to start working on it in the fall. We could go out with an RFP. You're probably looking at a couple $100,000 to start that process early, and not have as much staff time devoted to it. I will say that we probably won't have much work for some of our long-range planner maybe at that point, but we can figure that part out later. And maybe we limit it, to just the initial outreach, if we want to focus solely on housing and density and just bring in a consultant to help us with like some public open houses. Maybe it's not the growth policy update that we're looking for, because what it sounds to me like is right now we just want to see if there's an appetite to change the growth policy. And so maybe we just do, look for some assistance in doing some kind of public outreach on density in Whitefish and focus on that first, knowing that the growth policy will be coming, down the pipeline eventually. And those kind of things probably help as the housing steering committee goes through zoning for affordability and what type of, other units we could look at, as we look at tiny homes or temporary housing for construction workers, because to build these units, you got to have the workers here, and that's what we're hearing is a problem, is they can't house them. We're seeing it obviously with our staff, and so we know that as we hire positions, housing is a problem. So I mean, I think that's an option if we need to. We do have about this fiscal year, we have $120,000. We've spent some of it, so I'll just roughly say $100,000 that we had set aside for the housing needs assessment. We do anticipate that to kick off, so we probably need a portion of that. But then the TIF fund, or TIF district creation, we had $30,000 set aside for that we, I just don't have time to get that contract rolling. So that one is on hold. So, we do have the funds available this fiscal year. I don't know, Dave, what your thoughts are on something like that, if that's, moving in the direction, I mean, that's kind of what I'm hearing.
I guess my druthers is, you tell me the best way to get this thing moving, in terms of, okay, if it needs to wait till the fall, maybe we can live with that as long as we know it's coming. But I think what you're hearing, or what I'm feeling, is that what we need is to know that if that's when it's going to be able to go full bore. We don't want to get to that point and say, oops, well, we got to put it off because something else came in. That's the thing I think that I'm hearing up here. Is this has been, particularly the growth policy, which is what we're kind of talking on or focusing on now, this has been a priority for councils for how long? I mean, it's been on our priority list for a long time.
It's been on the priority list, but it's always been on the bottom of the priority list.
Right.
So it's not a priority goal. And that's something during our goal setting session or retreat that we could actually discuss, because it actually is on the bottom of the planning department goals. There are some other things like landscaping chapter,
Right.
But we don't want trees to go away either. So there's competing forces obviously at play right now. And so it has actually been identified as December 22 for some time. But again, that's going to take time to actually complete that
Well,
project.
I think, well, with council's thought on this, I think this collective would like to lift that from the bottom of the priority list and put it pretty high up. And maybe we need to do that at the work session in terms of expressing that and talking about that, or not at our work session, but at our retreat. That's fine, Dana, and I think maybe that's probably the way we ought to put that, because then maybe we ought to order some of those priorities. I think having been around here for some of those goal settings, I think the reason that the growth policy was kind of on the bottom was, okay, because we can get to that. Well, guess what? We ain't got to it yet. And so it's long past due. So I think what I'm hearing or feeling up here is that if we need to add that as an agenda item for maybe our retreat, to have that, to readjust some of our goals and then bring that back and get it, think in terms of moving it forward sooner rather than later. And tell us what that would take.
If I could just interject,
Sure.
At least from me, and I thought I heard it also from Ben, is that, and what Dana was saying about addressing the density and the zoning first, somehow getting to that piece first, I think is, at least that would be my priority. Ben, it sounded like you were kind of leaning in that direction as well, rather than this, the full update, but kind of figuring out a way to address that zoning piece first through the growth policy, the density and zoning piece.
I'm not sure I understand. I understand the words you spoke. I'm not sure what they mean. Does that make sense?
Yes, but Dana said that there's maybe a way to prioritize that piece of it.
I don't, maybe I'm dense, maybe everybody else. I don't understand what you want to prioritize. I understand the words zoning, density, that kind of stuff. I'm not sure what that means or what you're really looking at.
Looking at what we have currently and where are the places where it makes sense to provide higher density in town, and look at those areas and start getting public input on that.
Okay, so areas that are currently zoned for higher density than they are?
No, areas that probably, like Ben is saying, are underzoned potentially, where, why do we have half-acre lots here? Why is this zone WLR? Where in our community should this higher density go? Because we've heard a lot about where it shouldn't go. We just don't have an answer of where it should or could go.
So Dave, there's the map and then there's the zoning. And the problems, in my opinion, exist in both. Does this council have any, short of full growth policy updates, is there anything that, as it relates to the map, that this council can do to change things that don't make sense?
You talking about the zoning map? Or are you talking about the
map
future
of-
land use map?
Well, I guess that would be both. I mean, one's
Because
related to the other.
zoning has to be consistent with your future land use map under state law,
Yeah.
with the growth policy map. And so, I mean, the first step is looking at the future land use map, and we do have areas, like, your neighborhood where it may have urban future land use map, but the zoning is, at the edge of that, or even a suburban zoning. So potentially somebody could come in and ask for a zone change in some of those areas, because the future land use map does look at it as an urban, which could go up to a WR2, for instance. So there are areas like that, and that's stuff that we can identify as we go through this process. Where are areas that the zoning could get more dense based on the future land use map that isn't. And there's areas that are, all around the city that are WR1 that, are 10,000 square foot lots that could get split in half. It's still an urban density. And not very many people apply for that kind of stuff. People like their bigger lots. I mean, it's difficult to, look at infill and what's appropriate and where it's appropriate. But
But does changing anything in that area require the property owner to come to us? Is there anything that this council would even consider about changing?
I mean, the council has the ability to, change the future land use map as part of that. I mean, we just did that in a bunch of areas in, Highway 93 South with that plan, which, we have a bunch of list of implementation items that we need to get to that are part of our list of things to do. that, you know, implement that plan. It's difficult. You pass a plan, and then if you don't do anything with it, it just, you know, means it kind of meaningless if you don't implement all the elements of it. Same thing with the growth policy. I mean, we spent a lot of time doing that, but, you know, the city of Billings, they just, you know, allowed ADUs in every zoning district, things like that. I mean, different communities, the city council decides we need more, you know, opportunities for housing, you know, we can make a change like that, and that's something, you know, we're bringing some stuff with ADUs forward to the planning board. You guys will be able to look at that, you know, next month. See, you know, options like that to make it easier for people to do ADUs. I mean, that's one step, but when it comes to, you know, making more intense, you know, changing a WLR, WSR to something more, you know, higher density, obviously, you know, you can look at the growth policy map. The individual property owner has that opportunity to come forward with a zone change if it's consistent with the future land use map. But I mean, that's just a process where you have to go through the zoning change, through the planning board and the council, and the neighbors weigh in. And but you know, anywhere all across the USA, trying to increase density is a battle. It's a struggle.
Of course, and I mean, listen, there's reasons why these things don't happen lightly, and I get that, but I still think that it doesn't mean what we have is correct, because I don't think that it is. So if the map is hard to change, would it be worth considering focusing on the regulations or the specifics of the zoning districts, or the definition of suburban, or, you know,
right.
like,
I mean, that's one of the things we, you know, we mentioned, like when we did the Legacy Homes program, you know, we changed, you know, when a conditional use permit's required in a WR3 and a WR4 zone, where, you know, it was much easier to do multifamily in those zoning districts before the Legacy Homes, but we made it, you know, lowered the threshold to require everything to get a conditional use permit because we wanted to capture them in that program. Well, now that program's gone, we want to look at, you know, removing some of those restrictions. It's a lot easier to put something in if it's a use by right versus having to come to the planning board and the council and all the neighbors get to weigh in on it, and, you know, and influence the decision. You know, there's housing in certain zones. We might decide, you know, we just want to see housing there, and, you know, we'll have certain standards, and it still has to go to ARC review, and it still has to fit in with the neighborhood. But maybe it's okay to build a 4-plex or a 5-plex or a 6-plex on that if it meets the, you know, the size limitations. But those are the kinds of decisions, you know, that affect the housing. You know, just that decision to lower that threshold made it more difficult for people to do.
I understand that, but I would just make the comment that I think part of our problem has more to do with the complete inability to build projects that make sense in a lot of areas, not conditional uses that, you know, like making somebody go through a conditional use permit is not, in my opinion, necessarily where the problem. I think there's just a lot of land that you can't, with conditional or non-conditional use, you can't build reasonable development, period. I mean, that whole missing middle that you talked about in there, like that missing middle, you can't build the missing middle in half of town. I mean, maybe we could consider zoning adjustments or something like that. I don't know. I'm struggling. Sorry, but yeah.
The whole thing. Again, Rebecca, we probably need to get some.
I just want to say, I think our planning staff is working really, really hard because we've had so much building. I mean, one thing that I always try to remember is that we only see big projects up here, things that need a variance, but they're working really hard just to do normal planning and building every single day, and it's very, very busy. And so I would be supportive of hiring someone to help with the growth policy and take it off the table for our normal staff. I think I don't want it to be an area of contention with our staff, because I feel like they've been working really hard through a pandemic, but also at really busy rates of build out already. And so if we could help them by funding someone that could help start that sooner rather than later. And the reason why I think it's important is because it's come up with legal arguments quite a few times, and we have verified with Angie that it's okay what we're doing with the corridor planning as part of our growth policy update. But think it might be better to get that done sooner rather than later, but.
Thanks, Rebecca. And just to clarify, I think Dave or anybody took it this way. There is no question in anyone's mind up here that that staff is overworked and stretched beyond all. And so, as I said earlier, there's no flies on that. And what we're trying to do is get to a point where we can get this thing done. And once they know that it's a priority, I think the direction is tell us how to get it done. Do we need to hire somebody? When can we get it done? Do we need to hire help? I think we'd like some direction from you on how to get that moving. And I think I've heard that this evening. So I guess the other thing I would say, Dave, is if you can, maybe it would be helpful for you just to send us a memo about all the things that you're currently doing to increase the numbers of housing and maybe workforce type housing that might be come into place from ADUs to anything else, to give everybody an idea of what's currently going on. And then if you were to think of something else in particular over the next month or so that we ought to consider and bring the public to consider, that would be really helpful. I think is kind of where we're going. We'd like to, we know the long game, or even the near-term game, is the growth policy. Is there anything you think we can do, or at least need to consider in the interim?
Something, yeah, some quicker items. I mean, we had that list of stuff at the end of the slideshow that we're currently working on.
Right.
You know, with the housing committee and with the planning board.
Good.
You know, with the, housing authority projects they're doing, the snow lot, there's things that we're all working on and that are coming forward. And I think that we're going to get a bigger push with that when our housing coordinator comes on staff and his ability to, to focus on that as well. And I know, the housing steering committee's looking at a bunch of different options, and, there's no magic bullet that's going to solve this problem. It's going to take a bunch of different things all working together. And then we can identify zoning, and I think that's part of the puzzle. Our growth policy is going to help us know where to grow, and, it'll help steer developers to know which projects. People are, they talk to us, but they're afraid to even try to do a housing project anymore. They're gun shy. They don't want to spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars on consultants only to get shot down. And so,
I concur. I agree. So the direction I think you're getting in is make this, or put this an item for us to consider at our retreat or offsite to reprioritize some of this stuff. Come up with some thoughts on how we might be able to do that, to expedite it, whether it's hiring additional help for whoever. And if you think of anything, Dave, in the interim that we can add to the list of things that we're currently doing, that would be really helpful. And that includes, are there areas in town we ought to reconsider or try to direct people in terms of our zoning? Is that kind of an understanding of where we ought to go? Okay. All right. I think we're good with that. Next item, we've already done our consideration of appointments for all volunteer boards. We did have a discussion earlier about bear-proof containers for trash and then for recycling. And I think we probably ought to have that discussion now and give some direction to staff.
We're just looking for some staff direction, is that correct? Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Since I'm already here, I'll just say I think we need to, it's going to have to go back out to bid, correct?
The recycling will, but the garbage, animal-resistant containers do not.
Okay. Okay. Well, I guess we need to get the up-to-date numbers, in my opinion, on what it's going to cost to do curbside and single site, whatever we're calling that, and then it's a done deal for trash, correct? Right?
I would need a consensus of council for us to move forward with that. We'll negotiate a contract with Republic, amendment to our current contract, and then we would bring that forward for your adoption.
Okay, but it would be at roughly those same numbers with
the animal resistant. The garbage rates are accurate because those are the quotes we got from Republic.
All right, thank you.
Giuseppe? Ben?
yet another difficult decision here at the council. I know, it just comes from all angles. So once again, I believe in the reasons why we got here with curbside recycling. I mean, I think there is a lot of benefits to it. But I think like everything in life, it's a cost-benefit decision. And I know that when we evaluated this the first time around, it was $6 a month in addition to the $10 a month that is there. Well, now instead of $6, we're talking $20 a month, or tripling the garbage. $20 additional, $30 total a month. We're talking about now tripling the cost of solid waste in our town. And it gives me, I'm not gonna lie, a lot of heartburn about it. In my opinion, given the numbers that are in front of us now, I'm not sure that we would have made the same decision back when we went down this path. I'm not sure I would have made the same decision. I am open to ideas on this if there was a way to get costs down. It just feels like we have two really expensive things that are coming in here together, and it just feels like a lot. In my opinion, it might be worth considering, as difficult as it is to go down this path for so long. Sometimes if we all say, well, maybe that was just the wrong thing to do, then we should say that and go back. And in my opinion, I think it might be worth considering going back to the centralized recycling site, and upgrade to the bear-proof containers for trash. And that way it is a little more of a revolutionary change, or an evolutionary change and a revolutionary change in people's utility bills, which are already complaining about them being so high in our town, is what I hear from folks. So I could be convinced otherwise, but that's my current feeling on this right now.
Andy?
I think that recycling is a can we can kick down the road for a little while. Bear-proof containers is not a can we can kick down the road any longer. We've done it too long now. And I think from the recycling standpoint, people do have an option for recycling. They can sign up with Republic. They can sign up with whoever the guy is over in Dave Fishkowitz over in Columbia Falls. I mean, there are options for that. You can drive to the dump. You can drive to Columbia Falls green box sites. And so people have an option for that. We don't have an option for bears any longer, in my opinion, getting into 300-gallon containers in the alleys all the time. It's just, that has to stop now. So I'm comfortable to kind of sit on recycling for a little while, quite frankly, and I think see kind of how people think about it. I think there were some options thrown out there today, possibly Republic looking at a site. I think discussions with the solid waste district are something that we should definitely take a look at, but I'm not going to sit up here comfortably any longer with not going with bear-proof containers, and I think that needs to start like immediately. That's my opinion. So,
any other thoughts from council?
I'm sorry, just to add one thing. I would also like to see numbers for people that don't need to have their trash picked up every week. So if we could get a number from Republic, I think it would be worth seeing that option.
My thoughts, since I haven't had any yet. I agree with Andy completely. I think we need to proceed with bear-proof containers for trash. I'm happy to look at, if Steve really wants to, numbers for every other week. I'm not sure I would support that as a general proposition, because I think we'd end up with overstuffed containers from any number of people trying to save $3 or $2 by not getting their trash picked up every week. I think but it's probably a fair evaluation to say, okay, if we went to once every other week, for some people, what would that change our costs? And I think he's probably right. Probably wouldn't change it $3. But maybe that's a fair thing to look at. I think we need to go with the bear-proof containers now. I am also perfectly happy to put recycling on a as-you-want-to-do-it basis. We either take it down to one of the green box sites or the dump. They're generally on the way. Most people are traveling around the valley. They could plan it that way if they wanted to. Or they can contract separately with
with our friends at Republic, or, like you said, Dave Fitchwitz over in Columbia Falls. I think that's a great option in the interim. I would like us to look at the options of having, again, of having a central recycling site, and/or whether Republic or anybody else would be willing to, and whether we had the room for, quite frankly, as you raised, to have an actually a recycling facility, what that would mean. And so I think that's a fair set of discussions to be had in the near term, or continue to have. But I think there's consensus here to, let's proceed with trash, go to negotiate a contract. I think we need to look at their, to Richard's point, I would like to understand their numbers on the trash cans, the bear-proof trash cans as well. But I think that's, so I think that's the direction I would give. And Giuseppe, you have something?
Yes, now I made my thoughts after listening to the wise people here. So I fully agree with Andy and his point, and I just wanted to for my clarification, the bear-proof containers are the big round ones, or we're talking every single citizen's trash can as well?
So the big round ones would be removed, and each individual residential home would have their own container, like the smaller 96-gallon container.
Okay, understood. Okay, and then I would like to make kind of an irony about the fact that we cannot move on the growth plan and address affordable or workforce housing in the long term. I would say let's look at recycling as a challenge to ourselves only after we take the first step towards workforce housing, and let's call it affordable trash until we get there. Because it's kind of ironic that we're discussing trying to help workforce people by housing, and then, as Steve was pointing, we're doubling or tripling the cost to pick up trash in a mandatory fashion. So I'm all for tabling and postponing that decision and reward the community and ourselves after we took some key steps towards workforce housing, and then we can look at good, nice recycling.
All I would say, Giuseppe, is I think this group has learned to walk and chew gum at the same time. We might be able to do it on a parallel path. That's just my thought. So anyway, is that giving you the direction that you need, Dana?
Yes, it has.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that ends our formal discussions this evening on comments from counselors, and we'll start with you, Giuseppe.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. First of all, honored to serve with you as Deputy Mayor. I've been trying to call you Mayor, but John is watching on YouTube, I guess. And but two comments tonight. Number one, as you might know, I'm adamant about youth mentoring and youth participation in government. I've had some young people shadowing me in some of my sessions on Monday afternoons, and you met one young person, actually. I have learned that, as in the Parks Committee, in the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, there is one vacancy for a high school student. So I'm saying this publicly so people who hear can go out and think about it. But I'll go talk to the principal at the high school, at Whitefish Christian Academy, and I reach out to the homeschooling community as well as 4-H and the Boy Scouts to see if we could get some youngster interested. And the committee approved the idea of even more than one on an alternate basis. So not having 3 kids at the same time, but one, and then maybe do a relay so they get exposed to some local government doing. And you're a teacher, you might think, although you're in Kalispell, so, but you might help with this reaching out. So I piggyback on the Parks Committee idea. The other comment I wanted to make is that I put it out there, and the rest of the council can say yay, nay, let's talk to John. But I will propose that we invite the county commissioners and Howe District House District Number 5 Representative Dave Fern, who are all involved with our community, although in a bigger bubble, to the Friday night 5 till 6 session of the retreat, because that's probably the most informal one, having me making martinis, and so we can extend an olive branch and be the first ones to extend that olive branch, and we're gonna work together one way or another. So see if they come, and we can talk about where our bicycle paths end and where the county's bicycle paths start, where the corridor on 93, we can have some discussions. It's a work session, and that's just a suggestion that I throw out there. Thank you.
Steve?
Just want to say, give a shout out to Glacier Nordic Club. The golf course closed today, so the golf course is closed now for skiing. But the trails are still open until hopefully the end of March up on the hill. So, and if you're out there, please pick up your dog do, because it's starting to melt out of the snow. So, and pack it with you. Don't just throw it in the woods.
Ben? Rebecca?
Just a few things. People have approached me about sandwich boards downtown, whether or not we need to revisit that because they are impeding the flow of traffic. So I don't know who deals with that, but it's someone that has a lot of ADA experience. She thought it was something we should look at. Another one was not clearing sidewalks of snow. So public, you're required to clear your sidewalks. But it's very difficult for people that have low vision or mobility issues when people don't do that regularly. And then another person was putting up anonymous signs because people are not stopping at the crosswalks with the flashing lights. And they were asking whether or not we could paint them in fluorescent light, like a paint that would notify people where there was a crosswalk, so that at nighttime they would be illuminated. And is that possible, Craig, to do something bright and cheerful? And
in terms of street marking, pavement markings?
yeah, since not even with the light blinking at them do they stop sufficiently.
Yeah, I mean, we do, when we paint streets, we do put a silica sand in, which provides reflectivity, but we're limited in the colors that we can use by regulation, so I don't think we can do anything super cheerful.
Yeah, like pink.
I will say that this time of year, obviously, pavement markings are next to useless, and on top of that, we did absolutely no pavement marking last year because we couldn't get paint. So I think people can expect to see some vast improvements in our pavement marking this year, and I can tell the guys to step up the reflectivity a little bit.
Yeah, it's moms with children are getting worried about this. It's the same intersection where the kid got hit and broke his arm, and so it's just I don't know how to improve our traffic, but people need to go more slowly. And then the last thing is just how blessed we are to live in a peaceful town and live in a country where democracy is our way of life, and to please pray for Ukraine and Europe in general. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Andy, anything this evening? Excellent. We've had a long night. I don't have anything additional either. Just a side note, I think, Giuseppe, we ought to raise the suggestion you had with John for our retreat. I'm certainly up for meeting with the commissioners and to discuss anything that we could discuss with them. I'm not sure our retreat's the best time or best space for that, but let's raise it with John, see what he thinks. Anything else from staff?
Well, Rebecca brought up code enforcement issues, which we did just, offer, and we have hired a new code enforcement officer, so we should have that on board. I don't know, Frank, if you want to talk about code enforcement just in general. We have, in the budget, we do not have a second code enforcement position budgeted, a full-time position. But if you recall, earlier this year, we increased business license, actually it was last year because it was effective January. We increased short-term rental and business license fees, to short-term rental fees specifically to add an additional code enforcement person. I think one of the things that I'm hearing generally from council and just the community is that we need to step up that code enforcement. Obviously, we haven't had one at all, so people have recognized that, but we could proceed with hiring that full-time position before the FY23 budget. If you guys can give me kind of the head nod that you're gonna approve that in the next budget. We do have the revenue to offset the budget, the unbudgeted expenditures. And so we would have to go through a budget amendment process come the end of the year, fiscal year, to accept that. But we have the revenue that was intended for that. So if I can get all head nods of some type, or at least a consensus,
I think you got
then I'll
all
move
head-
forward with hiring that position.
And Dana, thank you for bringing that back up. I think that was, and that was a very kind way to do it. Thank you. And with that, I think we're adjourned.